Posted originally on the archive of our own at. Rating, Teen and Up Audiences Archive Warnings, Graphic Depictions of Violence, Major Character Death Fandom. Boku no Hero Academia, My Hero Academia Relationships, Aizawa Shoda Eraserhead and Migraines, Midoriya Izuku and Trouble Characters, Midoriya Izuku, Original Characters, Nezu My Hero Academia Usajiyama. Roommate Maruko, Kaminari Denki, Sensei all for one additional tags. Quirkless Midoriya Izuku, Midoriya Izuku does not have one for all quirk, slow build, BAMF Midoriya Izuku, swordplay, canon typical violence, vigilante Midoriya Izuku, quirk discrimination My Hero Academia, moral ambiguity, video game references, sadistic Nezu My Hero Academia, Nezu is a little shit My Hero Academia, ambushes and sneak attacks, gunplay, devil arms devil may cry weapons, martial arts, Midoriya Izuku does not go to UA High School. Mental breakdown, Nezu being an asshole My Hero Academia, chaotic Nezu My Hero Academia, Midoriya Izuku has a high pain tolerance, Midoriya Izuku has a gun language, English stats, published, the 17th of November 2020 updated, the 15th of March 2026. Words, 1,031,181 chapters, 246. Ronin. By Bob_Stevens. Summary. No one for all pity quirks, no all for one freebie quirks. Just an idiot, a sword, and way too much practice for a sane person. Focuses heavily on fighting. Notes see the end of the work for notes. Chapter 1, Chapter 1. Chapter notes. You, just wanted to say a few things before you get into this fanfic deep. This section of notes right here was written around 100 chapters into the fanfic, so I can give you some advice on what you're getting into. There is a lot of fights in this fanfic. The best one happens around chapter 60, so I can't tell new readers in good faith to wait until then. Most of the character development happens inside fights. I'm most comfortable writing fights, so I try to write a lot of them. It's a personal writing problem I have that I'm trying to fix. All in all, this mess was written as an experiment. These first few chapters are a testament to that. Look at that spacing. But I don't want to completely change everything in post. Mistakes are part of the learning process, after all. So I hope you enjoy this. If you don't like the spacing, don't worry, it doesn't even last until chapter 7. If you don't like the fights, they get better, but I like fights, so this might not be for you. All in all, enjoy yourself, and thanks for stopping by. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Smoke filled the air behind the school. To most people it was noxious, stinging the eyes and choking them, but he'd gotten used to it. He had breathed so much of the stuff in over the years, lung cancer was probably just around the corner. It was loud, they were above him, laughing and taking cheap jabs at him. It was hard to make out the exact words with his ears ringing, but he'd heard them all before. The few words that were audible gave away the ones he couldn't hear from the asphalt. It hurt. They stood around him in his smoldering shirt, some going out of their way to give one last kick as they made their way to class. His school jacket and shirt were hot, painful to the touch, but any movement was beyond him right now. He could barely think right now. The world seemed to shift every few seconds, a little darker than it should have been. His eyes were heavy, and his limbs felt like lead. It felt pretty good to stay down on the ground, other than the rock under his spine. That was pretty annoying. He lay there 5, maybe 10 minutes before rolling over. He climbed on hands and knees, using the school wall to stand up. He leaned into the wall like a crutch for a moment as he caught his breath, then hobbled away from the stability as he gathered his things. He picked up the books and papers that had been scattered around the koi pond, putting them back in his backpack, and slunk his way into the school proper in his class. He sat in the back of the class, content to be ignored by his peers. The burning sensation across his body was dying out, and his aches were either gone or his nerves finally bit the dust. The desk was cool to the touch, and he slid his hands along it to enjoy the sensation. It felt nice, just to lay his head on something cold. Barely a minute after he set his head down, someone kicked his chair, jolting him up. The class erupted into snickers as he barely hung onto his chair before slipping back a bit too far and toppling, disheveled boy and chair both falling over. This turned the class's snickers into laughter. Nobody even tried to hide it, and Sensei didn't care. He only told everyone to be quiet and pay attention. Put the chair back down, then sit back down. Follow along, listen to Sensei. His pen flicked across the page, taking notes as fast as a text-to-speech device and with twice the accuracy. Eyes flicked back over the notes, writing and underlining as Sensei spoke. Minutes passed like seconds, and school was over. The books disappeared, shoveled quickly back into his bag in the blink of an eye before he took toward the hall, trying to get out as fast as possible. Students laughed as he ran as if chased, but at least they didn't stop him today. Stairs came and went in an instant, and he didn't stop running until the school was just a dot behind him. He didn't have the endurance to keep going, despite wanting to never stop. Even tired as he was, the boy kept stumbling on while breathing heavily. People now walked around him, some giving curious looks to the extremely worn-out student. Most didn't care, and that was the best reaction. Everyone either hated him, found him fun to pick on, or didn't care either way. That third group didn't start anything, and at this point, that was the best thing he could imagine. This wasn't the first time he'd taken an indirect route home. Otherwise, faster bullies would just wait for him along on the way. He kept his head down as the streets emptied and the shops degraded. Citizens turned to bums, and buildings became vacant as the road continued onward. He slipped through the underpass, leaving all niceties behind. Ahead were the poor, the beaten, and the quirkless. Like him, they might give most people trouble, but they all seemed to know he'd be one of them before long. He knew a few of their names, nodding to them in an unspoken code. They weren't personally acquainted, but they seemed to get each other. Finally, all the people ended and the final buildings came into sight. From here on out, it would only get more and more populated until he reached home. Glass broke under his foot, stopping him. He looked through the building and its new broken window. Shabby and large, the door was nailed shut but the shattered windows left any attempt at entry easy. He chuckled at the planks holding the door shut. Your Deku too, huh? He chuckled sadly as he hit the road again, kicking a rusted pipe along his way until it went off the sidewalk. There was no point in running anymore, just a slow rambling walk home. It eased his injuries to enjoy the air and helped stretch his legs. Helped him come up with excuses when he finally got home to give. Stairs today, he fell down the stairs. The smoky smell was gone since he'd gotten hit so early in the day. Sad weak excuses were exchanged as he slipped past his mother. Straight to his room, where notes were dumped out and sorted. First, his studies were sorted, checking up on his work and knocking out the homework. The easiest part of school was school. It didn't even take an hour. A smile graced his face as he pulled out his phone, engaging the Hero app. He pulled out his most important notes, adding it to his pre-existing collection. As the news gave him details, he filled out new and old notebooks, adjusted information, spending hours lost in a glamorous world of gods. They saved everyone, quirkless or not. They helped everyone, who wouldn't want to meet one let alone be one. His smile stayed as he went to dinner, but lost its sheen as it became forced. The atmosphere wasn't much to look at, a nearly silent room until they split again. He cleaned up for both of them and returned to his room. Back on the phone, he pulled up his most viewed video from 10 years ago. The first thing he downloaded with every phone he'd gotten. The smoky backdrop, the scared people, all cut through by a confident loud laugh. A small smile bloomed as the words came out of his phone. It's fine now. Why? Because I am here. He let it play out twice, smiling all the way. Then he returned to his hero notes with vigor, showing no sign of stopping until he had to rest for another day tomorrow. He was already counting the days till graduation until he never had to see any most of his classmates ever again. The sleep took away the aches in his body as his already dim vision faded to black. Chapter and notes. Yo, this is the third attempt to make a story on this website. First one I got scared out of doing. Second one I got 14 chapters into and left alone while I did school, came back and it was all deleted because A30 doesn't save drafts. Word of advice for anyone who wants to make post stories on this website, import it from somewhere else with a hard save function. This is starting real depressing, but it'll get better. You can quote me on that, but I'll deny it until the day I choke on a french fry and die. Lastly, I do this not because I have some great, nuanced story in my head. Not because I have a passion, as you can see from my pompous word choice. I'm just doing this to procrastinate doing real work in college. Definitely not because I deeply enjoy writing stories and D&D got cancelled, and I broke under the pressure. Enjoy it, don't, whatever. If you think you can one-up me, please go ahead. I seriously would love more quirkless deco action. Post it in the comments so people can find my story, notice yours, get distracted, go to your story, and never finish this cringe fest. I'm out of things to say that I think are funny now. Remember, dying is illegal, so get your license first and then keel over. Chapter 2. Chapter summary. The start of the show most of us know. The last chapter was about setting up some reasons why this Midoriya was going to be different from canon. Also, just a word of warning, I will be more so using the draft Midoriya from before BNHA was official but after the original pilot, back when Midoriya looked like a murderer and Bakugo was the nice one. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. The boy went straight to school with no detours, trying to go as fast as he could. It was much harder to harass him if you couldn't catch him. He pushed a hard run, keeping it up for a good 5 minutes. He had been running ever since he was 5, and over the years he had become pretty good at it. Still, he deliberately arrived at school with just a spare minute before the bell rang, purposely arriving so close to the deadline to avoid meeting anyone before school started. Get in the classroom, get into his chair, and get out his notes. He did this all within a minute from actually entering the school, trying to give everyone as little of his time as possible. You couldn't hurt him if he wasn't there, so he tried to be as small and far away from other people as possible, shrinking up in his chair to be as small as possible as class started. Sensei walked in carrying papers, announcing how they were gonna pick and plan their future jobs. God. I'm sure you all want to be heroes. The class erupted into cheers as his classmates roared, making a ton of noise. They prawned their quirks, some even downright cheering. Sensei was still going, encouraging this mess. Hopefully, someone would end this nightmare already so he could finish quickly. Don't lump me in with all these extra sensei. There were only 2 people who weren't visibly excited, but only one exuded confidence. Katsuki Bakugo. This confident student had been relaxing in his chair, leaning back with his feet up, but now he started to get as physical as the rest of the class. Kachan jumped up on his desk, proudly showing off all his accomplishments. It was all true, but it seemed a little excessive. He rambled about going to UA, the national and soon-to-be international hero high school. While it was nearly impossible to get in, he had to admit, out of everyone in the room, Kachan stood the best chance of beating the odds and getting in. Then, at the climax of Kachan's self-gratification, Sensei spoke again. Oh here, Midoriya, you wanted to go to UA too, huh? He could feel everyone's gaze switch from Kachan to him. He sprung up to defend himself, vaguely aware of his babbling. UA's hero department has been open to quirkless applicants for years now. It's entirely possible. An explosion rocked him back, and he was almost grateful that it cut off his rambling. Listen up, Deku, you're even worse than these rest of these damn rejects, you quirkless wannabe. You really think they'd let someone like you in when they could have someone like me? His back hit the wall quickly and he just kept on stuttering before looking at the floor. And what I mean is, it can't hurt to try, right? Quote. Try, fucking, try, another explosion. What do you take UA for, bastard? A home for the mentally disabled. The teacher forced Kachan to settle down eventually. But soon as class ended, his precious hero notes got blown up and thrown out the window. Kachan had some snappy line for that too, but he hadn't been listening to people for years. You want a quirk so bad, trying diving off the school roof. Maybe you'll get some in the next life, Deku. Even he couldn't ignore that. He turned to face Kachan and his goonies. And his exploding hand. Any arguments died in his head, and spoken, as he stuffed the rest of his possessions away and headed for his notes. His notes landed up floating in the koi pond. No one ever came out here, at least, not willingly. He looked up at the roof, wondering if he jumped how long it'd take anyone to find him. Shaking these thoughts from his head, he picked up his notes and went on his way. He forced himself to brighten up as he walked home, taking his usual long route home. He'd take that hero exam. He wouldn't die in the entrance exam. He'd show off just how good a quirkless person could be. He'd go to UA, and maybe even meet his idol All Might. All he had to do was stay positive and keep his head up. To keep it in his thoughts, he literally kept his head high and laughed as he entered the underpass, raising a fist triumphantly into the air. Ha ha ha, ha 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 ha, dot ha. The sewer grate he'd just walked over was sent up. A pool of sentient green slime came up. A medium-sized invisibility cloak, just what I was looking for. It swirled around him, shoving a tendril down his throat. He couldn't breathe. Thanks for being here, kid. I'm in a bit of a rush. You really saved my hide. You're my hero. Now God was just making fun of him. This was bullsh stupid. He tried to pull the sludge from his mouth, but his fingers went straight through it. The world was fading to black. His body was giving up, forcing him to relax despite the panic. Then, instead of fading to black through choking, there was a huge gust of wind that sent him flying. He heard a thunk as the back of his head hit concrete, and everything went black in a crack. Wake UP, wake up, wake UP, wake ah, you're awake, young lad. I was worried I hit that villain a little too hard. Golden hair bounced in his view. His head felt terrible. He blinked, then gave a second look. A huge, buff man with bunny-like hair and $1 million smile laughed. Not to worry, citizen, you could say I popped the villain that attacked you. He held up 2 liters of soda pop, filled with Mr. Sludge. All Might, you're here, you're really here. He tried to find something for him to sign, but it was already done. He marveled at the handiwork, then bowed several times to his savior and idol. Thank you so much, sir. He paused for a moment, thinking it over. I have something I want to. I need to ask you, All Might sir. Do you? Sorry citizen, but I have to run. Stay safe, and remember, plus. Ultra tilde. It wasn't as breezy as he expected, hundreds of feet in the air with no stable buildings nearby and certain death below. It was really breezy, sure, but the winds didn't rip him off of All Might's leg like a pebble balanced atop a speeding car. He half thought he'd go flying and splat on something in hindsight, but he hadn't put in any real thought into this. Otherwise, this middle schooler probably wouldn't have grabbed the leg of the number one hero right as that hero tried to take off by jumping with enough force to launch both of them hundreds of feet into the air. What are you doing? Let go. All Might struggled against him, trying to remove the boy like removing an extra piece of tape. He managed to focus his eyes on his hero. I seek an T. ILLDD die. All Might paused, taking in what he said. He nodded and looked around for somewhere to land. They landed atop some random building, with him breathing heavily. Oh god, I thought I was gonna die. I always appreciate a fan, but I believe we need to part ways this time. Good day. It was a lot brisker than last time. Clunkily, he rose to his feet. All Might, wait please. All Might didn't even turn around, but he was just gonna lay it all out anyway. I want to know if someone, even someone who's quirkless, can become a hero. All Might did stop now, slightly looking at him. Everyone tells me it's impossible, and that I can never do it, and it gets me down. But then I remember you, and your confident smile, always saving everyone. Even if I don't have a quirk, do you think I could still save? WHO or you? He'd looked at the floor for 1 second and All Might was replaced with a blonde skeleton. The skeleton opened its mouth, replying, I am All Might, cut off by blood pouring from his mouth. Are you alright? Should I call an ambulance? All Might shook his head, sighing, and leaned against the railing. He looked like someone about to give up a big secret. Listen, kid, you see this? He raised his shirt, showing off a hideous wound. It was purple from blood and looked crushed and twisted. A villain did this to me, years ago. Took out most of my stomach. That big form everyone knows me for. I can only do it for a few hours a day now. A villain, a few years ago. Toxic chainsaw. Midoriya took a few guesses but All Might just shook his head. No, but you do know your stuff pretty well. This fight was never revealed to the public. A villain far worse than any of them did this. But you gotta look at this, and be realistic. I'm the strongest hero in the world right now, and look at me. Can barely hold my own shit, bleeding, and thin as a stick. Strongest in the world, reduced to this. He pushed off the ground, wiping dust off his legs. It's fine to dream, but you have to face reality. I can't tell you that you can be a hero in good faith. It's a dangerous world, and you can do other things. He went to the door, his walk more a shamble now. The police are often mocked for having most villains delivered straight to them, but it's a fine job. Goodbye. And with that, his idol went down the stairs as his dreams took a nosedive off the building. Chapter end notes. I wanted to complain a lot because it's one of my favorite things to do. Somebody a lot smarter than me once said the most unbelievable part of almost every story is the series of coincidences that start it. BNHA has one of the most coincidental beginnings out there, and I believe that's partially what makes it so good for villain Deku. Midoriya himself is almost the perfect villain, even if he never went to the evil side. He has it all, the bullies, the trauma, even being abandoned by his idol. A style choice no one cares about is two annoying things you might have noticed. Midoriya has never been referred to by name outside of dialogue once. I thought it was fun to show how little he values himself this way. Most dialogue is skipped, partially because I don't remember and don't want to rewatch the episodes but also to show how detached he is. The giant spaced out text is also to show disconnected he is from everything. The dialogue problem will be resolved in the next 2 chapters when we finally break away from the canon hard. The spacing problem will be resolved when I get tired of hitting the enter key a million times per chapter. Midoriya will finally get name dropped by himself when he develops some self-awareness and self-confidence. Another fast and loose complaint, why do fanfics use these characters' first names? Nobody remembers them. I don't remember them, and I am clearly everybody just use the names that they do in the show. Most people in Japan refer to each other by their last name unless they're close, which is a partial reason why Kachan is an embarrassing name. Katsuki, the first name plus Chan, a childish suffix. They refer to each other by last names in dialogue, so just keep it consistent. I might have written this fanfic just so I could complain without getting on other people's fanfics. It's definitely something I do. Please complain, it's how progress is made. I am aware the quotes from the original episodes are usually wrong or the dub, but I didn't want to find the first episode again and the dub was on YouTube. That said, have a great life. Chapter 3. Chapter Summary. This is the start of the major changes. If you wanted to see big shifts and deviations from canon, here they come finally. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. He stood on that building top for a while. It seemed like fate that earlier Kachan told him what to do. His movements were smooth as glass as he stepped up toward the ledge, gripping the bars. He peered over the bars toward the ground. What should have been a dizzying height looked as pleasant as a dream come true right now. The cold concrete never looked so soft below him. Putting some strength in those noodles he called arms, he began to pull his body over the bars. He couldn't get even one leg over before an explosion rattled off in the distance. A cloud of smoke rose, and the echo rang across the city to the walking dead man's ears. I can't even have a bad day all to myself. The strength left his arms as he muttered, slumping back down. He slunk down where All Might had gone out, taking the stairs 2 at a time, more stumbling than walking. He hit the street and didn't know where he was, so he started going where he thought they came from. If he went back to where he met All Might, he could get home from there. Did he want to go home? Did he care anymore? What was he going to do now, besides waste everyone's time? Everyone had told him he'd been wasting everyone's time, and he didn't listen for all these years. The students, Sensei, the doctor, Kachan, even his mom. They were all right. How the hell was some quirkless brat who couldn't even have enough grit to properly kill himself going to become a hero and save people? He was crying probably, he usually was. Wiping them was now just a bother, more would come. Something jabbed him in the back, examining led him to pull out a burnt and still damp notebook. Written messily on the front, hero analysis for the future number 13. He flipped it open, reading about some of the heroes he'd taken notes over. Just this morning, Mount Lady, Kamui Woods, Death Arms, and Backdraft. Could he fight on the same terms as any of them? If he tried to fight someone on their level, how long would he last? 5 seconds if even. It was getting loud, and the noise was distracting him. He stopped from his note ramblings to look up. Ahead, an entire street was blocked off. A shame, he needed that one to get home as quickly as possible. It'd just be better to go around. Despite himself, he listened in on the conversation. The crowd was talking about a villain taking hostages, never a good thing. Most hostages didn't make it out unscathed, but neither did the villains. Usually, the heroes would take care of this in about 10 minutes, but there was no way he'd gotten here from that rooftop in 10. A glance up and around showed the heroes, some very familiar. Backdraft was putting out fires. Kamui Woods was moving civilians. Death Arms and MT. Lady were holding back the crowd. Wait, what? He blinked, confused at the disorganized mess of heroes. Finally, because he might as well at this point, he tried to see the actual villain past all the civilians, police, and heroes. It looked a little familiar. A large mess of green slime writhed in the middle of the road, with a human stuck where Midoriya had been. Their arms were coated in slime, so they were probably the source of the fire. What were they trying to do? Make everything worse? Still, resistance was impressive. They'd been holding out for what, 10 minutes if you assume they created that explosion when they got captured. Wait, an explosion. He knew this route, and he recognized something way worse than the sentient booger. Kachan raised his head, screaming as he created another flurry of explosions. It was illogical. The explosions created smoke, taking air away and making it harder to breathe, so Kachan was just shooting himself in the foot. It was impractical, with this many heroes standing around. Death Arms and MT. Lady weren't doing anything, Kamui was running away and Backdraft was the only big hero doing anything even remotely helpful. It was insane. That villain had nearly killed him not even an hour ago. He still probably had some of it inside him. Best not to finish that train of thought. That villain was killing Kachan, the one who harassed him for years. So why did his knees shake when Kachan looked at him with pleading eyes? Why did he see himself, crying for the help that was only feet away and no one would do anything? A better question, why did it look like Kachan and the villain were getting closer, and it sounded like the crowd was behind him? Oh, she. Kachan. His legs pumped as he ran toward the villain, breathing heavily. The fire, the hero's words, it was all lost as his mind ran a mile a minute uphill and didn't go anywhere. I can't grab Kachan, my hands will go through that slime. Can't pull Kachan out, I don't have a grip or good angle. What are these guys' weak points? The villain's body was fluid and in constant flux, but the eyes turned to face him. The eyes and teeth aren't liquid, they can be hit. Its mass shifted into its right arm as it screamed something, growing in size. Shiftable mass, so its whole body except the eyes can be moved without injury. Any physical attack that couldn't hurt the eyes wouldn't do anything did. He grabbed his backpack and threw the whole thing at its face, getting a few small hits as the bag burst open and spilled his belongings everywhere. But like an eyelash in your eye, it didn't take much as his pencil case managed to bounce off the villain's eye. The attack lost momentum as the villain screamed in pain, giving him enough time to slip under the attack moments before it came hurtling down where he'd been. His head was still working, thinking of the time he'd seen it before. Large enough impacts like All Might's punches can still hurt the villains by the air blasts, like cleaning up a puddle with a tornado. It can condense and spread weight, can it? He remembered how, after All Might punched the slime into giblets, the villain had gotten stored inside a pair of 2 liters that were much too small for its whole body. But there had still been slime around the scene, slime that didn't seem able to move when it wasn't touching the main body. He could work with that. The sludge villain finally refocused, pulling Bakugo back into itself. Not bad, kid, I was gonna kill you quickly. Now I'm going to make sure this hurts. The green-haired child stepped back further, forcing the villain to stretch its mass and arm out. The kid didn't look where he was going and backed into trash bins. He took a second to look what he ran into, the same second the villain sprung forward to crush him with an arm. The force was truly monumental, splitting the air as the thick liquid moved downwards. The greenet turned back, holding one of the empty trash bins to try and shield himself. Everyone looking knew it wouldn't be enough. It was a plastic trash bin, for God's sake. It only took a second, with the heroes lurching forward too late to try and save him. Midoriya opened the trash bin up just before the impact and pointed the open end at the incoming attack, the force making his knees buckle. The villain's arm slammed downward and hit the edge with enough force to break bones, but instead of crumpling the bin like an apple juice box, the rim of the trash bin creating a small wedge in the goop. At first. Then the wedge got bigger as the force didn't stop until it went all the way through the slime villain's arm. The edge of the trash bin cut off the villain's arm, disconnecting it from the main body. Because he was so far from the main body, it had taken half a second longer to reach him and half a second less to pick up the trash bin. Quickly he kicked up the trash bin, pouring the sludge out behind him as he moved forward. Focus now. Keep your eyes on the shoulder to watch for the destination. Follow their eyes. All things the greenie muttered as he walked forward, eyes locked like a hawk. The villain gawked, seemingly the only one who knew why Midoriya was still standing. Its arm came out again, from the side this time. You won't get lucky twice, brat Tilda. Open the trash bin, setting the wheelless edge on the asphalt. He put his entire body weight behind the block and still slid as the trash bin caught the arm, pushing him back feet and nearly on his ass. But even as he was moved, Midoriya pushed the trash bin lid down to cut off the arm. Flipped the can to put its weight into the cut. The entire trash bin went upside down, Midoriya and its weight combining to cut off the slime. A third attack came, and Midoriya pulled the upside-down trash bin in the way, using the villain's own momentum to force himself out of the way. Back met wall and something had to give. Something in his chest cracked, sending a new wave of pain through him. The world spun, but it had been spinning for years. His lungs hurt, but that was the new normal. With barely a moment to pause, he pulled himself along with the trash bin, riding it and nearly face-planting into it to avoid the next attack. His body was durable, but it was running out of steam. This was it. He poured the slime out of the trash bin and onto fire. That should stop the villain from getting it back when he moved. Midoriya's eyes seemed to burn as he glared down the villain, unaware of the snarl he was sporting. Out of all the hero schmucks, only All Might had been a threat to it. But not anymore, with this small grinning demon in front of him. Looked like some Jekyll and Hyde quirk shit. The loser it tried to kill was long gone, replaced by this thing. He was smaller, under half the villain's size, but his glazed-over eyes and air of detachment made it seem he was glaring it down. In 15 seconds, he did more damage than the pros. This schmuck must be some hero in training or need to breathe for his quirk to work. That's the only thing that made sense. It used both arms for this next attack, attacking from separate directions to finally end this stupid game. Midoriya sprung forward, rolling the trash bin on its wheels, running straight for the main body. The arms went down as Midoriya flipped the trash bin, scooping out Bakugo's head and trying to pull the can down to separate the boy from the slime. But it got stuck. Bakugo was screaming at him. The hell are you doing, bastard? Midoriya planted his feet as he looked at Bakugo, trying to pull him out with all his muscle. They must have looked stupid, soaked in slime with a trash bin over one's head. Wondering what his funeral would be like. I'm sorry, Kachan, but They made eye contact. From Bakugo's perspective, the entire crowd disappeared as two large green tendrils appeared behind Deku to flatten him. Somehow, he couldn't focus on them. His gaze was fixed on the bastard in front of him. You looked like you were asking for help. There was a blast that shook the whole street as the hands landed. The flames flickered and danced in the shockwave, but they didn't hit the small child. Instead, they struck a well-muscled back. Laced with the shockwave of contact, deep laughter. Looks like I wasn't practicing what I preached, All Might more or less said to himself. The kid beneath him had adjusted the trash bin, seeming to be aiming to use the impact of being hit to force the other child into the trash bin in safety. But those were musings for another time, and that was something he didn't have at the moment. Aren't we the ones WHO should be risking our lives, not some kids? He was angry. Angry at the villain who got away. Angry to the heroes sitting idly by. Most of all, he was angry with himself. I guess I need to practice what I preach. DETRIOOOOOOT, he wound up, the villain attempting another attack. Damn you All Might. SMAAAASH. There was a huge gust of wind as his right sent the sledge flying, his left grabbing the children. The wind in the street spun, the sky shifting as clouds rapidly set in. As the rain began to fall, All Might slowly raised a hand in victory and nearly blacked out. He replanted his foot, then finished raising his arm confidentially, not showing the reporters or fellow heroes the blood trickling down his chin from his own lips. The crowd cheered for All Might, but not one for the small child who had done better than 3 pro heroes in a fight. He looked down at the boys, wondering what could have been, what could be. But soon he could no longer. The reporters on the scene made sure of that. Try as he might, even the number 1 hero couldn't seem to beat the might of the press. He sat alone, breathing in clean air from a tank as he was scolded. The heroes berated him, telling him off for his actions. You trying to get yourself killed? Don't go pulling stunts like this. Death Arms was as loud as he predicted. He just nodded along, weathering it all like sand to the sea. You couldn't break what was already broken. You die here, all our reputations go on the line. If you don't care about yourself, at least look out for others. That caught his attention. Reputation, what was that good for? He moved, grabbing his things off the floor, or what wasn't confiscated. There goes his favorite pen. Shush, all this shit on my first day. The press isn't going to be good. Mount. Lady complained about the press. The hell was the press doing for a hero? Your jobs are completely different. They don't like you, so what? How's that affect you saving people? Then, he made the mistake of looking at Kachan. Kamui Woods and some other minor heroes were talking to him too. You were pretty brave kid, I'd love to take you as a sidekick someday. Kachan snorted since of course, that wasn't good enough for him and his quirk, hyper-ego. But to him, he was getting bashed for helping and not being a useless piece of shit. And what were they doing to the fucking dipshit who started fires and nearly burned down the whole street? Good sat on his ass and threw a tantrum when someone tried to save him. They were praising Bakugo's bravery for sitting in one place, and knocking him for doing shit those fake heroes couldn't be asked. His eyes glazed over again as he stood up and walked away mid-parade. Fuck if he was listening. Fuck if he was gonna keep trying. Where do you think you're going, brat? I'm talking to you. This kind of shit is what we're talking. Stop walking. Death Arm's face was red from indignation, but what the fuck did he care? He didn't know it was this refreshing to stop giving a fuck. If someone had just told him, he'd have given up years ago. The police tried to grab him, but stepping past them was miles easier than dodging those jackasses at school. It seemed like once he stopped caring, every well of self-restraint was gone. It was probably only temporary but felt pretty good at the moment. Or what? He didn't even bother to look back, and hardly anyone was paying attention to him. The press only gave a shit about All Might, the heroes only paid attention to Bichugo, and the police and medical care were working on the fire. You gonna look on disapprovingly and wait for some kid to do most of the work, then have All Might step in at the last second to clear up your mess. He chuckled as he was walking, almost sure in the knowledge that nobody was listening to him. Practically nobody did hear all of it, but practically isn't reality. The child sauntered on home, amused at himself for thinking he ever wanted to be one of those losers. Chapter and notes. You made it. We finally got to the big starting change, the fight, which minorly covered the biggest contrivance I had with the cannon. In the canon, Midoriya wants to become a hero but does no physical work. Canon Midoriya could have never become a hero without All Might, which doesn't make sense with his analytical mind. He probably should have been prepping to get physically confrontational or use gadgets, but Canon Midoriya doesn't do shit. Other than ramming people being as underprepared as me, I wanted to try my hand at writing combat. It's more fun than I thought, and it's fun to try and write descriptively enough that people can imagine what they actually look like as they fight. If you want to try writing, I recommend watching a fight from a sport or a movie or something and write out what they're doing. Most of the interesting parts come from the little details, such as which hand people attack or lead with. Last note, if you read the notes you know the spaced out text represents when Midoriya is unfocused and doesn't care. This time we got a little section of Midoriya in the zone. Not sure everyone would like it, feedback's a thing. Not sure how much swearing I should put in it, but I aimed for about the same as me when my paradigm shifted. However, I'm incredibly jaded so I think Midoriya will dial it back once he wears this rebellious streak out. Till then, cheers. Chapter 4. Chapter 4. Chapter Summary. Midoriya misses All Might by being too angry. Starting the fight. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. He was fuming, a bomb with a frozen timer that's still ticking. He kept walking till he was back in the homeless district. He didn't know where he was going, but it wasn't going to be home. Not yet. The homeless usually tried to get a penny out of everyone who walked these streets, but normally they avoided somebody who was like them. Right now, there was a green monster prowling those streets. It walked in the middle of the road, snarling to itself. He stomped along the streets, stopping at the side of a familiar alleyway and his favorite kicking pipe. He kicked it up and down the road almost every day, and right now it was looking pretty sweet. His fingers brushed along the dented shaft, its body not quite straight anymore. Rust appeared in patches, and it felt great in his hand. Not quite entirely round, it looked as beaten as he felt. He contemplated the beaten pipe for minutes, standing still as a post. He was barely drawn out of his thoughts by shouting. His eyes barely shifted as he listened, not turning from the alleyway, hands still on the metallic rod. What you gonna do, old man? Beat it, now. Some kids, older than him. Something was hit, shoe on flesh. A kick. It was hard to make out the response, meaning they were on the other side of the road. There were multiple girls and boys, more than 4 then, attacking some homeless dude for his money. Who knows how he got it these days. They laughed as they hit him, not paying attention to the gentle thump as a backpack fell on the ground. The swish as someone ditched a middle school jacket, losing any way to identify him as he wrapped his undershirt over his head. His eyes were partially covered, but the undershirt had so many holes and was spread so thin visibility wasn't a problem. Life at school taught him to avoid eyes. If he was seen, people would find him and beat him. He didn't want to be beaten, so he became hidden. Life at school had told him to always be quiet. If he was loud, people would find him easier and beat him. He didn't want to be beaten, so he became quiet. 6 kids, all bigger than him. He'd seen how to hit people though, how to make it hurt. The back of the head was the thickest part, but the side wasn't. He'd seen heroes swing swords, couldn't be too different. The pole came up to his shoulder, gripping it like a baseball bat. Thwack. All those kids shut up as the biggest one took a metal rod to the dome. The big one fell to the ground, making a painful sound before the monster stomped on his head. It twisted and ground its foot into his face, still holding the pipe. The hell do you think you're? Second guy thought he was tough. It planted itself firmly on the big guy's body to get a good start, then pushed off and shoulder checked the next guy in the stomach. Pivoting off the big guy, it kept its shoulder in the second stomach so he couldn't fight back well and brought the metal pipe into his leg, right at the side of the knee. Nothing was broken yet, but that problem could be solved through repetition. Second was going down, and the monster grabbed his shirt to keep him up slightly. Third, a thin guy, and fourth, a tall girl, activated their quirks. They seemed to be related, their arms were both coated in bluish light. It wasn't in an experimenting mood just yet, so the monster dragged second up and used him to body check the others. He screamed, and the air seemed colder, answering what these bozos' quirks were. Another shove to send the second into them. Statistically, it only needed to beat half of these brats and the rest would give up. Other girl and guy weren't doing shit. He just needed to take these two out and they'd bail. It was tired, aching from earlier, but it was so used to pain and might have only been able to go all out when something was hurting it, edging it on. The two icy quirk schmucks sidestepped, separating. Women were generally weaker, and she was built like a telephone pole, so forth it was. She had moved to the left of second's flailing body, so it swung from the left to further divide them. It wasn't generally a good idea to surround yourself, but these schmucks would be worse if it left them together. The grip switched to a one-handed style, allowing for more reach at the cost of power. Sure enough, it struck her bluish arm and did jack shit. It pulled the pole back slightly, thrusting it like a rapier at her stomach and then veering off course to strike the inside of her arm. She had taken a step back to dodge, bringing her arms away from her body. The pole moved her arm out of the way, opening her up. Its fist crossed its central line, striking her in the stomach. Only one more second before third came. Her arms went down, and she was wide open to get a mouthful of metal. Switching back to a two-handed grip, it struck her head once and pressed forward. It shifted around her, using her crouching body to get some distance between itself and third. It has used this tactic before with Bichugo, running around someone trying to get up to make it harder for whoever was chasing. He stopped to check on his sister or cousin or whatever the fuck they were, bringing her eyes off the psychopath with a bar. I'm Mallory. Well, she was alright. The pole hit her in the stomach, forcing her up slightly. It had done another baseball swing right into her ribs to force her up, then shoved her into third, knocking him on his ass. He stood over these annoying jackasses with a bloody pole. His breathing was heavy, he ached like a bitch, and it was hard to see. His shirt had shifted slightly over his head. Surprisingly, he hadn't gotten hit yet. These jackasses fought like drunk dipshits, and beating the shit out of them was easier than just trying to survive Bichugo. This wasn't the first time they'd come through. He had heard about these bitches in rumors and whispers from the homeless, some rich dickheads fucking about during high school. They had done this whole song and dance almost every week. He stood over the collapsed siblings, grabbing the pole with both hands. His left leg was slightly out further than his right, feet shoulder width apart. He brought the pole over his head, glaring straight through them, unaware that he was using his first sword technique, a simple overhead. He stepped in with his lead left foot, moving from the shoulders and pushing off with the back leg. His arms came down, his elbows straightened and turned in, finishing with the wrists angling down as he slammed the pipe into third's forehead. Everything before this was basically baseball swings and sharp pokes, like an old man with a cane beating someone. This swing cut through the air, giving the skull nowhere to go as it was trapped between asphalt and pipe. An adjustment step backward, he still gripped the pipe with two hands. He listened for heavy breathing to see if anyone already knocked down got up, but there was just groaning. He turned to the last two standing, stomping on the first guy's stomach again. You two, carrying your friends out of here. Next time you come, bring some bodyguards or the least of your worries will be getting a concussion. That line was a direct quote from an underground hero, Eraserhead. It seemed fitting, and it was one of the only recorded proofs that there really was a hero named Eraserhead. You, get your money. Jerks like these usually took whatever cash the local homeless managed to scrap together. Get everyone else's while you're at it. He'd do it, but he wasn't sure where they put it. Plus, that gives them fingerprints. And the only thing with any unsmeared fingerprints right now was the pipe. The homeless man took quite a large sum of cash from the big guy, before putting most of it back. Figures he was the one who had it. He watched detach as they made tracks. It was so strange. As he thought, he felt great. The rush of dancing around those drunken dipshits, well, those probably drunk dipshits was amazing. Was that why Bakugo beat him, for some thrills as he fought? His gaze shifted to the homeless people who had come to thank him. They didn't know his name, or what he really looked like, and vice versa. They wouldn't have blamed him if he didn't do anything. But right now they looked so grateful. They were smiling like he used to. The young, the old, the broken, and the beaten, all were ecstatic, looking at him like he was some kind of hero. As good as the fight felt, this was better. If they come back, let me know. I'll deal with them for you. It was weird that this morning he was thinking about diving off buildings and admiring All Might. Right now, all he could think about was planning around the next time he had to fight again. The failed heroes were far from Midoriya's mind as he took his undershirt off his head, put back on his coat and backpack, and finally headed home, tired but satisfied. Chapter and notes. Yo, the first willing fight of Ronin and I already started incorporating sword techniques. That's good and all, but we got bigger fish to fry. Midoriya's been in 2 fights and hasn't taken a serious hit in either. He fought 6 people and didn't get hit once. Somebody should post this because I hate impervious MCs. The only reason Midoriya didn't take that much damage in the first fight was that he didn't in the anime, B he actually did. Midoriya has a few. This directed his mom's attention away from the sudden appearance of a pipe and onto him. She ran through the usual questions he'd heard a million times and berated him, just like the heroes. Somehow, it was a lot harder to get mad at her, and nearly impossible to stay mad. He had gotten a week off of school to heal, but he needed to go to the doctor tomorrow. It seemed like something he should have done today, but who gives a shit about some quirkless kid and his internal injuries? He shook his head, watching until his mom moved into the kitchen, then moving past her while grabbing his pipe. He crept past her while she was busy, moving to his bedroom and tossing it under his bed until he thought of a better hiding spot. Dinner was katsudon, a pork meal that had been Midoriya's favorite for years. To him, it was the taste of better days, without the bitterness of every day. And on this day, he still savored the meal a little more than usual as he though about his whole life and the things that turned his food bitter. He'd spent his days always admiring heroes, but he'd never really seen what they were about. His mind flashed to Death Arms and MT. Lady, talking about their popularity as if it was something important. A slight grimace flicked on his face, but he forced it down with another bite and made some excuse about biting his cheek. They made it seem so difficult, like you had to be chosen by God to become a hero. He'd done it twice in one night, and he didn't need some cheesy superpower with a weird name. But the people I beat was a nearly defeated villain and a bunch of drunk assholes. A real villain wouldn't have fallen so easily. Then all I need to do is get stronger. Not even All Might's immortal, and with real training, maybe I could become a hero. A real hero, not some fake. He nodded to himself and took their dishes, washing them out and drying them off before putting them up. He slipped into his room, recharging his phone as he began to watch videos of All Might. No longer watching them as a fanboy, but as an aspiring hero. All Might really seemed to be almighty, but Midoriya watched and noticed something. He began to just watch the attacks, eyes widening slightly as realization dawned on him. Through all the smashes, all the giant explosions had something in common that Midoriya should have known years ago. Nobody watched more fights than Midoriya. He could recognize over 20 different martial arts, even if he couldn't perform any one of them correctly. Quote. He doesn't know a single martial art. Most of All Might's techniques were just basically flailing. The only reason they worked was due to his immense strength. If he used a real punch, he could focus the attack and avoid blowing up buildings with every move. Midoriya started looking across other professional heroes. Almost every hero in the top 10 didn't have a single real martial art to their name. There were only 2 Yoroi, to no one's surprise, and the washing machine for some reason. Didn't think a guy with hoses for arms could pull it off. Martial arts became more common the further down you went when it became less about your quirk and more about your skill. That wasn't to say top heroes didn't have any skill. Endeavor was living burning proof of that, as unpopular as he was, but most heroes didn't seem to know any official martial arts. It might have been that they never learned any, maybe they just never used their skills anymore, but whatever the reason, the result was the same. Most people just fought with quirks. He sat back, having looked at thousands of clips of heroes. He stared through the ceiling, rubbing his eyes as mumbled. Why does no one use real martial arts? This is just fancy-looking nonsense. He took a minute to look up some martial arts videos. Something basic, easy to learn. Maybe a spear. It seemed like a good choice. It was just a big stick. Easy to get, good range, bad transport, really bad in tight spaces, and terrible if you got too close to the villain. Alright, maybe a spear wasn't such a good first choice. Hand to hand, he didn't have the muscle, the coordination, or any training partners right now, but that could be fixed. That was looking the best until he searched one last time for weapon tutorials. Guns were expensive, and most heroes didn't use them because they were too dangerous. Clubs were good, but he already knew there wasn't much to learn. Still, he could put it in the back of his mind. Finally, he found something that shouldn't have been so hard to find. It wasn't even rare, and there were tons of videos on it. Swordplay. European swordsmanship, Japanese swordsmanship, Chinese swordsmanship, there were so many options. He grabbed what was going to be his 14th hero journal, taking notes over the videos he wanted to watch. A brief dive into the videos, sorting and saving them until he had a clear layout of what order he wanted to do. Japanese would be easiest, with local dojos. Next up Chinese, and the hardest to get here would probably be European. Setting the order he'd learn them in, he began to research the swords. Swords could be sorted by shape to find what culture they were from, then the length of the sword to find the type of sword. It went from the ridiculous nagamaki, a sword that was almost 6 feet long, to tiny scalpel-like knives. There were many in-betweens, but to start with he could use what he already had. Measuring the pipe, he cross-referenced to find what he currently had was about 80 cm. Taking off some for the handle, it could be a big katana or a small tachi. Katana was generic, but that meant there'd be more material to learn for it. Katana it was. He began to look to see how to make one, since buying one would lead straight back to him if he got found. It'd be harder to trace if he made it himself though. Apparently, a real one took years to make, but he could find the specs to fake it fairly easily. Longer than 60 cm, shorter than 90 cm, a slight bend throughout the blade, and a weird folded tip. It'd be a pet project, but I could craft a sword. Or a swordish thing, in this case since it's not really an accurate sword meant for killing. No, focus. He needed a few things, a blowtorch to melt the metal. Some chemicals to treat it, a handguard, and a handle. A quick check of his bank account led him to be disappointed. He could get some of the parts, but not all, and it got worse when he got too hard thinking. If he wanted to do this, really wanted to before he got himself too far, he'd need a mask. A bike helmet would be nice, that'd cover his identity nicely. Something generic, he could shop for that later. He refocused on getting a working training sword. The blowtorch cost practically everything he had if he threw in the propane to use it. He could get it tonight, rent the propane tank when needed, and forge a pseudo sword. And a hammer, but he could find one of those pretty easily if he lowered his standards. He made sure to put everything away before he went to bed, still wondering if this was all a good idea. Chapter and notes. God knows how I'm still kicking. Word of advice for any actually smart writers, don't be like Bob. I'll put the writing jargon at the end, but I'm only doing all this because I'm putting off a college deadline and I find this relaxing. Few quick possible questions. The hell is a nagamaki? A nagamaki is a sword with a blade about 2 feet long, and its handle is just as long. It looks ridiculous. Why is Midoriya making his sword? Cause it's more thematic in a story, but in universe it's cheaper. He can make it non-lethal since Midoriya isn't trying to kill anyone, and it's harder to track. It means it will take longer for him to get his first sword, but the sword won't get him arrested if people see him. If he didn't make his own sword and someone saw him carving people up on the street, the popo would search for local residents with that sword, track him down and nab him. Why didn't Midoriya get medical care at the sludge villain attack? Ronin Midoriya was going to but left early due to being pissed off at the heroes. He also has more injuries right now than canon because he got hit more than in the canon. To flex my non-existent writer muscles, you should never do what I'm doing for a serious writing project. I follow the principle behind the vomit draft. It's a draft where you don't hit backspace once and just keep trucking. You're not allowed to change anything until the second draft when you pick out what you like and don't like and focus. In the third draft, you fix grammar, spelling, and make it all line up. I'm not doing this on Ronin. Ronin is entirely the semi-thought-out vomit draft, with fixed grammar and spelling. This leads to a few major questions I'll put here because I try to do things as I think of them. Do you have a plan for this story's direction? Yes. Until I catch up to the anime, I know what I want to do. Will you be following canon plot? Mostly. Some events will be shifted to more heavily favor this version of Midoriya. I don't like stories that include canon events because they happen when they're actually irrelevant to the story and characters. Will Midoriya go to UA? Not the entrance exam at least. Hope somebody takes care of Uraraka, otherwise, she might be disqualified for incompetence and nearly getting herself killed, if not passing with major injuries. Quirk discrimination. Thanks for asking a totally not forced question. I believe stories usually don't go hard enough into quirk discrimination. We have seen in the first episode what people treat people with quirks in those sacks of shits we pretend are humans called quirkless. Then it just disappears at UA. Bullshit. I'm not going for 1800s racism, it's just going to be a theme. I don't like when people blow over things that should be an important part of their story, and most quirkless Deku stories ignore the fact that Midoriya used to basically got harassed every day of his childhood for it. That's it, stay Gucci and I gotta go flunk a class I've been putting off. Chapter 6. Chapter Summary. Midoriya gets more time off due to injuries and can't strain his body. Starts at the doctor's offices. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. The 2 cracked ribs seem to be the worst of it. You should just get lots of rest, and maybe an ice pack. Don't be afraid to cough, and avoid physical activity please. Inko nodded for them while he tested the slight pain when he breathed. This was his 6th time with a cracked rib. Should only be 3 weeks until he was back in top condition. He got approved for an extended leave of 2 weeks instead of 1 week. He'd be nearly done healing when he got back to school, although his recovery time might take a little longer, with his little bout of vigilantism. He ghosted through the hospital, following his mom quietly. They went back home, but he only stayed a few minutes before heading to the hardware store to get the propane torch. It didn't take long for him to buy it, slipping it into his school backpack before heading back home. All he needed was the oil to put the sword into, and he'd be good. In his own home, he grabbed some garbage bags for the oil. He could make a trough out of stones and dirt, then put a trash bag inside to keep it clean. Then add the oil and metal. As he sorted the things he'd gotten into his bag, he watched another video to make sure he knew what he was doing. First, he'd flatten and curve the pipe to make the blade. Then he'd put in a dull edge and could sharpen it later. Lastly, he would bend the end on itself to make the tip. Then he'd quench and oil it up to make sure it stayed hard. He gave a brief smile as he thought of his first real project toward becoming a hero, looking over the new list of things he needed to buy. A file, to shave down any imperfections and get it sharper at least, as sharp as he needed it to be. Sports tape for the grip, and, that was it really, he was pretty sure he could make do without anything else, but a sheath would be nice. More things came and went as he contemplated the list, finally arriving at the conclusion that he needed somewhere to build this thing. Somewhere he could work and not be bothered, where people wouldn't follow and no one cared what he did, or how long he did it. There was a place like that, but sitting at his desk he wasn't sure when he'd be able to go there. For now, just getting all the parts would be fine. The oil could be bought at a supermarket and the wrapping at a sports store. For the sheath, he could get wood glue and wood at the department store. Maybe a saw, or chisel. He hadn't looked into it too much, but it shouldn't be too hard. It wasn't even his first day off and he ran out of things to prepare. He was out of money, and wouldn't be getting any more this week. Instead, he watched videos on swordsmanship, discovering that he could get started on learning something at least. Most of what they told you to start with were leg positions and styles of walking, specifically 2 easy beginner ones. Constantly, he was stuck in a slight crouch with his back as straight as his ribs would let him. He paced back and forth in his room, staring down his signed poster of All Might as he held a pencil with both hands like a sword. His left leg led him forward, and his right led when going backward. They made a big deal about pushing off the back foot instead of dragging it. He was trying to get it right now, and it took more concentration than it probably should have for just walking. He wasn't even going sideways, and he was starting to breathe heavily. His legs had to be constantly bent at the knees and ankles. Back pointing straight up, with no slouch. One leg, his left, in front, arms letting his pencil, sword, rest at shoulder height. This was just the basic sword stance, not even a difficult one. His toes had to touch the ground first, his shoulders wide and his head upright. Still, he practiced. He took many breaks but he didn't stop for an hour, just walking back and forward like a robot. Eyes glued to the poster of the man he once admired. It pissed him off, and that made him more motivated to keep going. He shifted to walking from side to side, always focused on the poster with an expression of hatred. His only large breaks, the ones that went over a minute, was to eat. He was probably overtraining, but he needed to do something, anything. After he had walked in every direction while glaring down the poster, he returned to his videos. He learned about gauging the distance between yourself and an opponent, how to properly find the effective range of your weapon versus their weapon. These videos were over 50, 60 years old, some long before quartz existed. While evaluating his opponent's weapon's reach was pretty useless these days, finding his own could be helpful. One of the videos gave him some breathing tips, like to breathe out when he swung. He took notes over it all, absorbing the information like a sponge. How to know when your opponent All Might poster Sans legs are in range of a cut. When your opponent All Might poster Sans arms are in range of a cut. He drilled as hard as he could, still stopping regularly all day. He didn't even do any of the work he was assigned, feeling a little rebellious. Well, maybe he'd do a little before he went to sleep. Bright and early he was learning more breathing styles. Breathing was supposed to be good for his ribs, so learning a technique to help with that should be fine. Most of the results crossed over with meditation, something his sword video said was pretty good. You were supposed to let your mind drift, but not fall asleep. Right now he was more worried about drifting off to sleep, but the aching in his ribs as he kept proper posture stopped that. His back still stung from hitting that wall. Right now, though, he just stayed still for 30 minutes while he breathed in deeply. He was unsure what it actually did, but he felt a little better. After that, back to training movement. To help discipline proper walking technique, he put a pile of clothes in the middle of the floor. As he walked, he had to not step or trip on it. He only hit the ground 7 times in the first hour and 8 more after the second. He weaved back and forward with side to side, getting better at the rapid shift of his weight. He was sockless, to get the best feel he could as he danced across the floor. Only after 2 hours did he get some food. He grabbed and ate quickly, then went back to his room to meditate some more. His ribs kept him awake and focused on his breathing, possibly the first time an injury had helped with something other than getting out of gym class. In through the nose, out through the mouth. He was sure he looked ridiculous with his eyes closed, chest stuck out like a prick, but it's what he'd been shown to do. After the meditation came more movement. It had been a problem for his back at the start, his legs at the middle, now at what might be the end it was his toes that ached. Pushing off with the back foot used the calf and foot, and after a million repetitions, you felt it deeply. The pain, however, just brought out greater focus in him. He was by no means perfect by the end of the 5th hour walking around and over a pile of clothes that occasionally grew in height, but he only tripped 5 times and fell once. Back to meditation for another 30 minutes. Or, for 20 minutes before he decided to do his homework. He tried to get as much done for both this week and the next and might have gotten lost in his work and done the whole week's worth in 2 hours, only stopping to grab a quick snack before going back into meditation. He was definitely overdoing it, but his mom wasn't letting him go outside until he'd been indoors for 1 week, and his room was a little small to swing the pipe around. Instead, another rousing round of leg drills, this time practicing the second leg movement since his legs felt like they'd fall off if he took one more step forward. He practiced pushing off with his legs, basically lunging while maintaining his posture and quickly turning. He would jump to the left, turn to face a new direction, and keep doing that until his left leg felt like it'd fall off. Then he switched to the right and kept on going. When both his legs were too tired to move, he went straight back into meditation. Well, even if he kept calling it meditation, he wasn't really doing anything meditative. He was just breathing deeply thinking about punching Bakugo and All Might in their stupid smug face as well. Not really All Might, cause he looked kinda disabled, and punching a disabled person just felt wrong, but punching Bakugo, he'd immediately get blown up if he did that, so. Puppies. He just thought about puppies for 30 minutes. Third day and his legs ached like they'd been beaten, but a few painkillers helped solve that. More meditation, more notes. He finally looked up some other styles of moving, such as a shuffle he practiced that was good for explosive springs. He spent a good 10 minutes doing that before his legs couldn't keep up and it was back to sitting around meditating. Instead of random things like puppies, he tried to focus on sword stuff he could use. There weren't any really extensive sword guides, so maybe after he got the basics down he could look elsewhere like the library. Everything was better when it was cheaper, and it didn't get much cheaper than free. There were heroes who used swords he could research, and some dojos, they probably had some techniques but then they might recognize his swordsmanship if that distinctive fighting spirit, anime troupe was to be believed. He could just rip off animes. Most of it was probably gibberish, but there had to be some real techniques behind the mess. He jolted from his meditation, going straight back to the shuffling steps while trying to maintaining his breathing pattern. He might have spent more time meditating and aching than the last day, but he was still full of spirit. The fourth day was the one he remembered to stretch before he worked out. His legs felt stiff and heavy, but after 20 minutes of stretching, they felt as heavy as lead instead. At least they weren't stiff anymore. They just felt like they were on fire even when he wasn't doing anything. Now, he practiced shifting in place with his shuffle and side movement. With the two paired up, he could turn on the spot easily. If he could see himself, his stability despite his legs shaking was spectacular, and his glide as he walked around was smooth and connected. Still, he practiced, bringing back out the pile of clothes to move over and around. He didn't train for long periods but in many short bursts. He tried to meditate while stretching his legs, but it didn't really work. The lotus position was beyond him, and that one wasn't even hard. Still, he kept at it until he needed breakfast. He tried to eat slowly to pace himself better, but still scoffed most of it down quickly. Wash the dishes and back to walking. He had been glaring at that poster of All Might every time now, trying to make it explode through sheer concentration. His torso always faced the poster, and his legs switched easily from a smooth shuffle to a burst of speed. It didn't carry him far, but he made sure to always move a little forward or backward to move off the central line he'd been on. He had dropped the focus on breathing while he put his two walking styles together. It weaved into a strange, silky erratic dance of smooth sections broken up by staccato leaps and slow crawling steps. There wasn't much of a goal, other than to focus on putting together the walking styles as seamlessly as possible. He went a full 6 minutes before he tripped and nearly face-planted this time, so there was an improvement at least. Lunch and dinner came and went, with him hopping around like an excited rabbit using his new walking style. He tried to adjust his normal gait but only succeeded in looking dumb as hell. On the 5th day, more practice. He now had two clothes piles, and his feet moved around and over them. His legs had stopped shaking so much, and all this meditation was making his ribs feel like not garbage. His feet snaked across the ground, his front foot pulling with his back foot pushing him toward his end destination. His arms were pretty relaxed, despite still holding his pencil sword. The breathing came back in erratically, and his dance seemed as smooth as the sky. That is until he tripped over one clothes pile and landed in the other. Now, though, he laughed it off. He felt much better, with his legs and ribs aching that much less. He wasn't sure if he felt stronger, but he definitely felt less weak, if that made any sense. He could regularly add his breathing, though he almost always could only do for it a minute or two before his concentration gave out and something went wrong. Sometimes his legs would try to go through each other, other times his toes would catch on the carpet and he'd go face first down. He didn't always fall, but he wasn't exactly the epitome of elegance. His quiet steps were pretty close to the crouching walk with always being on his toes, he had just needed to adjust to the crouching part in his knees and hips. The shuffling walk had thrown him for a bit of a loop, but now it was like they were always meant to merge together. He spent most of the day doing this before switching to finishing the homework, spending 2 hours knocking everything else out. His meals now came and went, he was too focused to notice. The attention that once only cared for heroes now fixated on the blade, or on tiptoeing like a ballerina to get better at the blade. 6th day, most students would be in school again, but instead, Midoriya moved around his room with grace unfamiliar to the teenager. His shoulders barely moved up or down as his body seemed to glide around, his occasional trips and stumbles now more of an exception than a norm. Any flat-out falling was rare now, even with his breathing. He'd been getting better at smiling again. Not his fake smiling either, a real smile. This goal seemed tangible, and it was much closer than becoming a hero with no clear roadmap on how to get there. He had looked up more videos and was now onto balancing. It generally had him in some weird pose looking like an idiot until he fell over, but he could hold those poses pretty well. Then it was back to his shuffle step, and then more meditation. Midoriya had started to watch more sword-making stuff. He knew the things he'd need, and he figured he'd have his sword working in under a week. Some would not just for the sheath, but the handle. Some would stain, a saw to cut and shape the metal. It could be a handsaw, he could make it work. He'd use everything he saved again, but he'd make that sword. His mind stopped wandering and he rose from his cross-legged position, returning to his pacings. Now, he randomly switched targets and focused between two different All Might posters. This made all that grace and elegance he had had while facing one target fall out the window, everything going wrong when he switched attention. It'd all be good until he'd try to turn, repeatedly running into furniture or being way too close. It was a new problem for Midoriya, but he'd get over it. He'd been getting over a lot of things, and if he could adjust to this, what else could he take on? 7th day, Midoriya woke up as if he was going to school, grabbing breakfast as quietly as he could, and returning. He ate, then went straight into meditative breathing. He kept flipping over his problem from yesterday, forcing his brain to adjust and think. He kept having trouble when he was switching. Why? I can't see myself relative to the next target and wind up too close. That could be solved by switching focus first, then moving his body to the target second. That leaves me open to the last target. Then his final actions on the current target should be to either plan a way to deal with both, break off from one or have a pre-planned form to use while he switches, like guessing what they're going to do before he switches. Either way, he could practice switching targets early. His current targets couldn't do anything other than fire him up about training, but it was good to keep future plans just in case. Now, his transitions flowed as smoothly as a drunken man's steps, but he stopped crashing into things. Practice and repetition would sort that out. Midoriya moved gracefully around his chair now, adjusting to having to move in the much more cramped quarters. Cramping the area made movement a lot harder since even in such familiar territory he still hit something now and then. He barely did any attacks, since he didn't know any real ones or that he had once performed one correctly. For now, his light graceful steps kept pace as he danced all day and into the night, floating around the room and circling like a butterfly, patiently waiting to get out and finish his current project. Chapter End Notes. Yigati-yo, this is the first part of swordsmanship that I'm actually sure about, and I think it's also the longest chapter. IDK, my word count is busted so I can't see it. This chapter took me a whole lot longer since it was created around the idea of meditation I had to do for one of my classes. Meditation is not something I'm very familiar with and have only done twice myself. However, almost every workout and trainer who has mentioned it praises it. So if I get details wrong, my bad. Hopefully next time it's correct since I'm starting to meditate more. Some things I do know, Midoriya's meditation sessions are extremely long for a first-timer. Most first-time meditations are 10 minutes, not 30. It's also a mindset about being calm, proper breathing, and focus. Midoriya's are so long not because he's good at it, I tried to stress that he's not really doing meditation right. He just has a lot of free time. The injury he got was fractured ribs, and in his case not even fully broken ones. The average heal time is 4 to 6 weeks, and Midoriya has had this injury several times before, which is why he's so confident in his healing time. It's good to breathe and cough to keep your lungs clear and clean, hence the meditation and breathing. Finally, the thing I'm so confident in, Midoriya's first swordsmanship. I'm not trying to teach a class cause I'm dumb as bricks, but one of the first things you learn in almost any fighting sport is how to properly stand. For proper swordsmanship, have a slight bend in the knees. It doesn't have to be huge, but your eyes should be at least as low as your nose when standing upright. His normal sword walk is a standard engagement walk, and his shuffle is based on fencing. Note I don't do fencing, hence based. The burst of speed is ripped from the combat sport I play, boxing, and a stance that's very similar to a fencing stance. Other than that, this was a good write. I'm not sure how the writing pace of this story will go, because it's definitely not going to stay this fast unless I really put off studying for finals. Chapter 7. Chapter 7. Chapter Summary. Midoriya has practiced moving and is now creating his sword as cheaply as possible. 1 week of his leave from school is done. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Midoriya left as soon as possible for the stores. First up the general store getting 2 bottles of motor oil. All the problems from quenching a sword in the motor oil were related to toxicity, and he had managed to scrounge up his breathing mask from spray painting some of his All Might figurines. Even now, being a fanboy had its perks. None of the ones he wanted, but right now he'd take what he could get. Hand wraps. There wasn't much of a replacement, other than he had roughly learned how he was going to have to tie it. He practiced on the pole as it was right now. After the sports store, everything else he needed was going to be in the hardware store. A handsaw to cut metal and wood. It'd be hard and annoying, but it'd have to do. A file to clean up the sword when he was done. Wood planks for the sheath and handle, and lacquer to keep it in keep it in all right condition. A drill and hammer. He had borrowed both from home, but it should be all right. If he brought them back in working condition. There'd be no handguard right now. It was a very basic design, with it being a shirasaya. Most shirasayas were metal blades encased in wood handles until they were put into their real sheath and handle. Finally, he made his way into the abandoned part of town again. He nodded respectfully to the homeless people he hadn't seen in a while, who seemed delighted to see him again. He just smiled and waved as he went on his way, still carrying the metal pipe in one hand. The planks were under his left arm, and his backpack stored everything else. He went back to his favorite abandoned broken glass building, shattering the rest of the glass with a swing of his pipe and a brush of the backpack. After he was sure he wasn't going to get stabbed, he went on his way inside. The room was dark, but he made his way to what had been the second story. It looked like a small office at one point, and he could see there were signs some people had come and gone after it had been closed. No point in giving them a hassle, they were long gone. He moved through the building like a shadow. Midoriya was wearing his darkest hoodie, a dark blue. It had once been blue like All Might, but Bakugo fixed that problem. It was blackened and burned now, and perfect for this. He stopped when he finally got a room with windows and a tile floor. He began to set up, laying out the individual parts and then closing the door for privacy. He opened the windows as far as they'd go to help air everything out and slipped on the breathing mask. He set up the oil for later and swept the counter clean to use for his hammering. He gave his written instructions one last read over before he got to work. First, he sawed off what was unnecessary, sawing it straight down the round end, and then a little bit of the length. The tip was removed to create a point that'd be bent back on itself, creating a sharp point. He even made a basic tang, or the part that the handle would go on, with his saw by removing material. The blowtorch was lit with a cheap lighter he'd found on the site, not even needing to get his own. He wrapped his hands in cloth to protect them as he heated up the bar like a Moor, running it down most of the bar several times before it became a glowing orange. Setting the torch on the counter, he used the hammer to draw out the tang or what would become the sword's handle first, flipping the side of the mallet between swings to keep it cool. The curve was also added early, as soon as the handle was safe to hold. When he had a moment to spare, he cut off what would be the wooden section of the handle and drilled it through. He gripped the cooling blade by the edge side, reheating the tang and shoving the handle onto it. It burned a tight grip before he removed it, and added a small hole using a piece of wood as a hole punch, hammering the wood into the metal and then hammering it flat again until there was a snug little hole inside his tang. He marked the same spot on the wooden handle. He hammered the tip back into place and flattened what would be the blade itself, giving it a slightly rounded side instead of the box shape it had been before. Then he began to file the rounded to an edge, or something resembling it. By no means sharp, but it was clear which part was which. It now looked like a real sword, if you squinted, and had only ever seen swords in children's drawings. Irrelevant, he lowered it into the makeshift hammock bucket he made with some chairs, and 2 trash bags taped together with excessive amounts of duct tape. They were filled with the oil and released toxic gas as the sword was quenched. Midoriya started the timer on his clock and made sure none of the plastic bags got stuck to the hot metal. He drew it out as the timer beeped, helping the sword air by fanning it out. He waited until it stopped smoking, grabbing the file and cleaning up the whole thing. The blade shimmered in the scarce light as he held it, a testament to his work. He took a piece of wood, measuring it out and chiseling the wood to the shape. This part took longer than the metal since it had to be about equal in depth and smooth, or else the blade wouldn't draw correctly. Finally, when the two planks could be stacked and the sword could be drawn easily, Midoriya glued the two together. From there, he took the sword out so it wouldn't get glued in on accident, and sat on the planks. After this, he'd have to cut it to size and put the blade together. Then he'd lacquer everything and it should be right as rain. In the meantime, he was stuck sitting on it for 45 minutes. This was when he was going to finish the handle and blade. Firstly, he sawed and filed the handle to a grip able size and form. Next, he drilled a hole as straight through as he could get. After that, he fitted the wooden handle to the metal blade's tang, lining up the holes. He took a thin straight wooden stick, a little smaller than a pencil, and drenched the end in glue before hammering it through the lined up holes, making sure the blade wasn't leaving the handle. Midoriya then snipped the excess wood off and filed it all smooth. By then the glue for the sheath was practically done. He remeasured and drew on the wood, sawing until it actually looked like a real sheath. It had been a whopping 18 hours of work to make a glorified club. He'd barely eaten, and his stomach told him that was as bright an idea as grabbing All Might's leg. He took the lacquer and cheap brush he'd been given when he bought it, slathering it on the wooden handle and sheath and letting it sit for 30 minutes. It was a painstaking process, and it wasn't even done yet. He eventually checked the time, packing up his equipment and heading home with a still unfinished sword. The lacquer meant it wouldn't be done for a while, but he'd do his best in the meantime. He had done the same trick as before, with a quiet entry and a second loud one to distract his mom. When he went to get changed, he slipped the sword along with himself and hid it under his bed. Dinner was great, not just because he was really hungry, but because for the first time in a long time, he was really happy. Bakugo could go fall off a cliff and die, All Might was a bazillion miles away in New York or something, and he and his mom were sharing a meal. It wasn't one of his favorites, but it was still good. After dinner he went back to his room, locking up so no one accidentally stumbled in on his work, and continued applying lacquer to the wood. It was slow and smelled bad, but he had his desk right next to the open window and the curtains shut. From there, he worked on meditating again to digest the great meal and not be so tired. His ribs were not fans of blacksmithing, and with all the smoke in his eyes neither was he. Still, he put everything away once again and went to sleep. Midoriya felt warmer, both in a literal sense and a mental sense. Life was good for now, but he didn't want good. He was going to go for great. The sun rose, and so did he. A kiss to his mom before he left, to make her think he hadn't already left the sword outside. From there it was back to the homeless district, back to the abandoned office. Back to work. He kept working, lacquering every 30 minutes. Between applying layers of lacquer, though, he moved around as he practiced moving again. It was a much larger space than his room, and he could move more freely. This was what it was supposed to feel like, his dance sending him swirling around the room like a phantom, flowing to a song only it could hear. He still wore the breathing mask, mostly because the lacquer smell was ungodly. He kept the sword partially unsheathed as he lacquered it to get the top of the sheath and the handle. Every 30 minutes, without fail, he lacquered it again. From the outside, it was a strange view. A strange hooded being moving in circles and darting around, stopping dead without fail every 30 minutes and going to do something before coming back to its mad dance. This strange ritual was only visible from the second floor though. Gangs and homeless moved around the building without even thinking someone else was inside. But all this must come to an end, and at a little after noon, someone finally noticed the whirling creature inside the old loan office. "Aye, boss," he muttered nudging his superior. "Ain't no one supposed to be in our territory." "You mean these homeless bums?" He spat to one side before replacing his cigarette. "Who gives a shit?" "And no sir, it's just." He pointed up, confused as the creature's shadow came back into view. "What is that?" His boss squinted, breathing out purple smoke. "Somebody with a death wish. Boys, find out who's in our turf and take him out." The gang confidently strode toward the door before one kicked it in and they made a beeline for the stairs up. The inside of the building was dark, and something smelled like shit. The whole place was as quiet as the dead as they entered, some of the gangsters muttering. They had made enough noise to alert the whole street what they were doing, and there was nothing inside at first glance. The leader decided to stop having them stand around like the bums on the street. "Everybody get a buddy, spread out and search, I'm staying here to guard stairs. Get moving." The group spread out and spent a couple of minutes searching the rooms. They each called out that they couldn't find anything, but for some reason, the leader never responded. It was silent on the stairwell, even though he stayed back to supervise the rest of them. Eventually, some people went out to figure out what was happening and saw that their leader was, from the top stairwell, gone. Stepping forward out of the rooms and toward the stairs he was supposed to be at, they did find him. Crashed at the bottom of the stairs, unconscious. They crowded at the stairwell, some ditching their partners. It was like free hunting for the quiet ghost. The sword might have been dull, but it hit much harder now that it easily cut through the air. The dense blade could take these gangsters down in one hit to the side of the head. It really reinforced how fragile humans really were. He seemed to slide from room to room, sticking to corners and just pretending he was part of the gang. No one noticed the shifting number of gangsters, like the extra one who followed stragglers without partners, pretending to be their partner until he slammed his sword stick thing into the back of their skull over and over until they passed out. Now all that was left was the people who'd never split up. Midoriya wasn't sure he could take them all, but if he could get the drop on them he might be able to rush them. It's what he did for the guy on the stairs. Seeing their numbers, he split from the group, waiting downstairs for someone else to come down. He only had to wait a few minutes before two guys came, not looking around the scene and staring at the first guy's body, only focusing on one thing. They should have paid more attention, otherwise, they wouldn't have gotten hit in the side of the head like goofballs, the first one taking a sword to the temple and the second getting pushed down by the first's body, unable to defend himself as the metal cut through the air and struck him once, twice, 3 times over the head. That made for his 5th and 6th victims. Excellent progress out of, what, how many gangsters were there in total? 15, 17, it was probably an odd number since the leader, the one on the stairs, had no partner when Midoriya jumped him. This should have meant everyone else did have a partner, like these two here. He waited again for more to come, a fisherman casting a line, and this time 6 came down. Aw man, how long have they been knocked out? The whole time. This is some bullshit. The gangsters didn't seem too unsettled, but nobody had actually seen the takedown. Midoriya moved back up the stairs and passed on the information like he was a part of the gang. The people didn't seem to bat an eye. God, this was too easy. He got another one alone in the knockout room by shoving him down, letting him trip on entry, and beating him with the sword, sending him to a land of sweet dreams before going back for the rest. That sleeper was his 7th down, leaving 8 more to go. Little over half and most of the smart people were probably downstairs, trying to figure out who did this without realizing how small their numbers were. He went back into hiding, letting 2 people come back into his room by making the door creak. They stepped inside, not checking behind them as the door closed and a wooden dowel blocked anyone outside from joining the party. The guy had long nails for a guy and gloves designed to let out his fingers. Is it a quirk or a fashion statement? The girl looks like she'd eat me if I didn't take care of her first. What had looked like a perfectly innocent box opened up, a small short shade crossing the room with ease. The sheath was left back by the box as he used his walking technique to approach. Just like the drunk teens, lower her and send her out. He stepped in with a baseball swing straight into the side of her knee. There was a loud crack and a scream, letting everyone know where the intruder was. The man turned as Midoriya used his walking technique to continue the technique, bringing it back and throwing a second one at his stomach. The villain tried to get back and out of the way, but Midoriya had spent an entire week learning just to adjust his position to hit a target. It wasn't a real technique, not yet anyway, but he let go with his right hand to make the blade extend further than it should have. It painfully pierced his stomach, as the tip of the sword was the only actually sharp thing on the sword. Midoriya switched gears again, using his switch target as he adjusted the distance. He had chased after the guy, so he was too close to the girl for a solid attack with wind-up. He sprang backward to create defensive distance and then shuffled back forward for offensive momentum, using the momentum to with his overhead strike again on a downed opponent. The girl just managed to get her arms underneath her as the flat edge of the sword clipped her right above the neck. She passed out almost instantly, just before something slammed into the door. It creaked but wasn't buckling quite yet. The man was covering his chest with one arm, so Midoriya hopped to the same side as the arm he wasn't able to attack with. He felt the arm swing down at him and countered like he'd seen but never gotten to actually practice against another sword user. Arm met sword, and while his nails might have been enhanced, bone against metal was a tale as old as time with a depressing track record. His arm was pushed back, probably with a fracture for his troubles, and his body was unguarded. Midoriya took this moment to step in and swing upwards, doing his first exchange of blows. The man's uninjured arm, the one he'd been covering his stab with, had come out and scratched at his face. It mostly got his breathing mask, but there was probably going to be some blood in his eyes in a minute. His face felt hot from the scratches, but that was just normal for a cut. The man had definitely not won that exchange, however. The sword struck his chin and turned the man's own momentum against him. All the energy he generated swinging downward at Midoriya and Midoriya's own momentum went into his chin, turning it into another swift knockout. That was 9 people down and it was time for an exit. He grabbed a box, put his coat on it, and threw the whole mess out of one of the windows and into an alleyway. Then, he lightly moved away as the gangsters called. He jumped out the window. He's in the alley. He didn't even need to confuse them, they did it themselves. From his hiding spot, he watched as the guy finally broke in. He went over to the window and spotted a conspicuous hoodie in the alley. He's trying to make a break for it. Midoriya didn't bother with that guy, it'd give away where he was. There were still others in the building to pick off. He just had to wait, and sure enough, somebody else came in while he went out. He took up a different room on the second floor, waiting and watching. Somebody passed him by, and it was the last mistake they got to make that day, slamming their head into the wall by tripping them, then kissing them with a sword for their troubles. 10 gangsters down. I thought dangerous criminals were a little more dangerous. How were so many of these guys getting beaten so easily? It was absurd. Were they a gang of people with health problems? He grabbed his lucky victim stuff and threw it into a corner for later. He might get his whole costume for free if this keeps up. Slipping downstairs, there was the guy who broke into the second-story room and no one else. Midoriya wasn't feeling too lucky, so he decided to take the slower approach. Something fell to the man's left by the door. He turned, seeing nothing out of place except a weird wooden stick. He barely had time to react as the sword swung from the opposite side, catching him in the shoulder. There was a crack and his face went into immediate discomfort. His shoulder shouldn't be looking too hot, so Midoriya purposely went for that side and swung again. This time the man dodged much better, stepping cleanly out of the way. He wasn't ready for Midoriya adjustment and near-instant second attack. The thing about katanas is that they can technically stab things, but it's like how technically you can cut a tree with a paperclip. It's not meant for it. However, Midoriya's sword only had one sharp point on the whole thing. It wasn't quite a normal stab, and it didn't do a lot of damage, but its reach was excellent. The man wasn't ready for Midoriya to turn his body completely perpendicular to his and thrust at his already stretched leg, piercing his pants and thigh. He grunted in pain, but Midoriya kept moving up. He adjusted again and attempted his usual finishing blow, a two-handed lunging overhead cut. Instead, the man used his quirk, pushing the metal blade away magnetically. It wasn't strong but it did fuck over the attack. He then went for his own knife, a wooden one, and lunged. The knife wasn't much, but it was sharp. And it was something Midoriya actually trained for. Midoriya calculated the range of the knife, adjusting to stay on the man's bad side just far enough that it looked like he could maybe cut him. Magnet Man took the bait and swung, letting Midoriya miscalculate the distance and still get grazed on the same side of the face. Now it really hurt, and his vision was partially blocked with blood. Either way, he didn't use his quirk this time due to the impractical range and suffered, getting the sword's pommel to his already dislocated shoulder. As he held in pain, Midoriya readjusted his grip to one hand for better reach and brought the sword down on his head one-handed. It lacked power, but his head dipped as Midoriya took a step back to adjust for distance. Then, he threw a proper two-handed lunging overhead cut. Chapter End Notes. It's a brawl. Everyone loves those, right? Cool. Fact time. To make a sword from scratch as a trained professional takes 1 week with handheld tools to make something good. The reason Midoriya cheated is that his sword is a piece of shit. He got to skip making the handguard, wrapping the handle, making the metal, and sharpening the sword. In other words, his hand is unprotected, his grip sucks, the sword's not that durable and can't hold an edge, and isn't that sharp. There's a reason there's only one really sharp thing on his sword, despite swords generally being described as sharp sticks. More questions no one asked time. Why is Midoriya so good at fighting? It is easier to get better at fighting by learning techniques than by gaining raw power, especially at the beginning. The gap between some dude on the street to some dude who knows how to punch and dodge is pretty big. Midoriya's attacks are actual garbage, and the only reason it's been working is no one has had a reinforcement type quirk. Some quick math. It takes about 900 pounds of force to knock someone out in one hit to the noggin. A professional baseball bat swing generates about 4,000 pounds of force. Midoriya has been exclusively aiming his baseball swings, which are pretty bad for a real swordsman, at the skull and kneecaps. Couldn't find a solid answer on how easy it is to break a knee or how much force it does take. I do know it takes 3,500 pounds to break a rib, so it should be around there. Also, Midoriya normally wouldn't be able to generate enough energy. The reason he can is the sword's shape. A thinner object will travel easier through the air than a larger object of the same weight and needs less force to get to top speed. In addition to the thin zone of contact condenses the force, making it really good at breaking things, even if it's a god-awful sword. Chapter 8. Chapter 8. Chapter Summary. Out of the 15 gangsters that entered the building, Midoriya has taken out 11. He has taken 2 hits to the face and is bleeding from his head, and his breathing mask has been damaged. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Midoriya scrounged Mr. Magnetic Personality for anything good, only getting some cigarettes and a lighter he didn't need. Nothing to help with his head. He went back inside, holding his head with his hand, and returned to grab his backpack. He looked over, eyeing the fingernail guy he took out earlier in his arm bracers. Was it really stealing if they tried to kill you? Probably, and those arm bracers weren't going to help his head to stop bleeding. He let that thought go and pulled out the athletic tape he never actually needed for his sword and wrapped it around his head before making a messy knot at the end. A sleeve to wipe the blood from his eyes and he was good to go. In the end, was stealing really that bad? Sort of, but he'd stick out like a sore thumb if he didn't. He stole a jacket but he did leave all the guy's possessions. He really did, except for those bracers. Who knows how they got onto Midoriya's hands. They were a tad big, but if he put them on over the sleeves it was fine-ish. From there, with backpack and pseudo-sword in hand, he ran away like a sissy baby. He'd only been winning ambushes, fuck if he was gonna try to take 4 people in a straight fight. He took back to the shadows, grabbing his All Might hoodie that they'd left for some reason. He checked to make sure they hadn't left him any extras in the jacket once he was a block away. After he was sure nobody was following him and stuffing the hoodie away, he walked away casually praying no one got a good enough look to figure out who he was. He just imitated Bakugo's expression and walk, adding some volume to his normally silent steps. Some people looked at him weirdly, and he could see some of the gangsters, but he just remembered the looks everyone gave him. He didn't even bother speaking as he gave a brief nod despite glaring straight through them like he wanted to carve them up, keeping a rhythm by tapping the handle of his sword with his thumb. They didn't touch him, assuming he was another gangster. The oversized hoodie hid his face, but what was visible was red bandaging and a mask over his mouth. His eyes didn't litter about, but latched onto each person and glared them down as if dissecting them as he tried to analyze their quirks. He never flinched, mostly because the things they could have done to him weren't that unfamiliar. He made it back to the more public areas, keeping this persona of knowing what he was doing all the way to the woods where he switched clothes again. It was a little bit after noon, and his head had stopped bleeding by now. With a little hand sanitizer, he cleaned his head and adjusted his hair to hide it. He finally looked over his sword. The blade was 70 cm long, with a little over 30 cm for the handle. The whole thing was now a dark brown, and the blade still had some blood on it that he wiped off in the grass. The balance was abysmal, centered about 10 cm too far above the handle. But still, it was his now. Now that he wasn't at risk of getting torn to pieces by gangsters, he could appreciate his own work and pat himself on the back, pretending his work was all right. He swung it around like a kid with a brand new toy, sliding and dancing across the grass. While his foot movements might have been elegant, his upper half looked like a train wreck. He began to practice his signature move style with the new weight of the sword. It only took 3 minutes of walking around like someone pretending to be a ninja to feel the new difficulty in his arms. The grass hid the uneven ground, making it much harder to keep his rhythm. To top all of this off, he was tired and hungry. He was mostly stalling until his head felt better to go home, but this practice was a lot better than he thought it'd be. Midoriya still took breaks to meditate whenever he got too tired, which was pretty often at first. He wasn't doing 30-minute sessions anymore, just 5 minutes was enough. His head was more clear though, and his muscles relaxed. Then straight back into walking around like a creeper. Most people were in school, and here he was fighting gangs and pretending to be some sort of warrior. It was very strange, but he'd be lying if he said he wasn't enjoying it. His feet slowly adjusted to the grassy terrain. Fighting indoors was much easier than this mess. To make sure he was getting actual practice he kept switching where he was training. By changing his physical location, he had to adjust to the uneven ground and not just memorize the layout of a certain part of the ground. His arms felt awkward just holding the sword to his shoulder. He would have to start looking up real sword techniques, and he figured the first one would be one that didn't require much space so he could practice in his room. Or maybe he'd just keep training with his pencil sword, then switch to the real deal. He could also get one in right now. Midoriya paused in his meditation, pulling out his hero journal number 14 and skimming through the 5 sword techniques he had transcribed. A drawing cut, good for starting combat or getting the sword out when ambushed. An overhead cut, the easiest to learn. A flicking cut that lacked power but had a good range. An upward cut, that paired well with the overhead by getting the sword in place for it. A sideways cut that could get the most power if done correctly, but the more power you put into it the less you could use your sword to defend yourself. The upward cut does have synergy with the overhead cut, but it's pointless to learn it on its own. Plus it's similar to the drawing cut, so that's just more reason to learn the drawing cut first. Overhead and sideways are both power swings that make it harder to block incoming attacks, so I'd like more experience dodging before I give up any defense I can get. That leaves the flick and draw. Midoriya contemplated these two for an hour, even trying the basics of both. He wasn't really sure which one he wanted until he thought about which one was more applicable. A flicking cut would be useful almost all the time, but a drawing cut would only be useful when his sword wasn't drawn. How often was he going to get caught without his sword drawn? So, believing in his own bad luck and paranoia, he set about learning how to do a drawing cut. First, though, he'd have to learn how to draw and sheath a sword. It was something he hadn't really thought about until he looked it up. He thought you'd keep the edge pointing down so the blade looked like a smiley mouth, that way the blade was already in the position for a drawing cut. Instead, the edge was supposed to point up, making the sword look like a frowny smile from the side. When drawing the sword, you were supposed to pull back on the sheath to get the sword out faster. To get the blade in the position to cut the opponent, you turned the sheath as you drew the sword so the bend wrapped around your body. Despite him being the one writing all this, he only vaguely remembered it. He must have been in automatic scribbling mode when he did it. Still, he could set about drawing the sword over and over before he learned any cuts. When sheathing the sword, you covered the open end of the sheath with your hand, creating a small hole between your index and thumb to guide the sword inside without damaging the sheath. That was especially good news for his sheath, barely held together with wood glue. To avoid cutting your hand when you sheathed, one would place the flat side of the blade's tip at the elbow, then pull it along your arm until it reached the hand. Then you stopped pulling it down and slowly, very slowly, push the blade into the sheath. Or you brought it back too hard, hit your elbow, and dropped everything. It took Midoriya's arms more tries than he'd admit to sheath it correctly, mostly due to his shaking arms. The sword kept falling off to one side, and he'd start all over again. He wasn't even doing a real attack, and he was still messing it up. Still, he didn't stop until he drew and sheathed it 10 times in a row successfully. It wasn't difficult, it just took more patience than he wanted. Now he could draw and sheath his sword with minimum glances to make sure it was in the right place. He'd have to practice more until he could do it without looking, but he really wanted to have an attack right now. The basics of the drawing cut were just to draw the sword and slash in the same attack. Start with the feet shoulder length apart and the left foot forward. Lean forward slightly for better reach and balance, and as you slash, step forward to get good reach and power. Your non-dominant hand held the sword and was to keep it at hip level. When you start the draw, push the blade out by the handguard with your thumb. If you had one, pull the sheath down and backward to get it off as quickly as possible. As you pull the sheath off, twist it so the bladed side faced away from the body for a good clean attack. Finally, the dominant hand leads the sword out. Start at the shoulder, drawing in a diagonal direction for proper positioning. Straightening the elbow, as it would mostly be the elbow's job to get the sword out of the sheath. Flick the wrist before impact to generate most of the force. All of this combined would generate the power to cut something hypothetically. In real time, however, Midoriya was still trying to figure out if he could push the sword out with his thumb despite not having a handguard. His notes didn't have any of the real names of these parts, just the names of what they looked like to him. Blade, tip, handle, sheath, none of these were the correct names but he could recognize them at least. He spent another hour draw slashing miserably before giving into hunger and hitting the road. He covered the sword with a giant trash bag, wrapping it until it was just a big stick in a bag. He made his way home with a large smile on his face and a song in his heart, proud to have not gotten his teeth kicked in and strangely excited to win a real fight. Was it fair? No way in hell. Fuck facing that many guys in fair combat. Even All Me, even Superman had situations he wouldn't face. God, that was an old reference. Midoriya did his usual trick, unaware of just how good his quiet movement was getting. His mom greeted him happily, glad that the darkness around her son seemed to be disappearing. They didn't have a long chat, but it was pleasant. They talked over where he wanted to go, what he wanted to do now. Even if he didn't become a hero, he should still go to high school. Perhaps he could become a lawyer, but they were the real villains, some said. He could try his hand at manual labor, or something managerial. For now, though, he was content to go to general education at some two-bit school. It'd be better for them to save money at some place he could pass easily than drown in debt for years at some rich snob school like UA. Honestly, how was he even going to get in financially? That cost a lot of money he didn't have. After he finished eating, he went back to his room to meditate again and think over his game plan. His future was really important if he wanted to do this. School shouldn't be difficult if he wanted to do vigilante activities, maybe he could get it all online. Next, his costume. He took out his breathing mask that was supposed to be for painting, running his fingers along the cracks and cuts. He'd need a real mask soon, but this could do in a pinch. He'd like a little more body armor. He didn't like how naked he felt when people with no weapons could fuck him up just as easily as he could them, but without any of the effort. He might be missing an eye if either of the people he fought tried to kill him. His new mask would definitely have some protection just because he was sick of getting hit in the head. The arm bracers had a hard backing on the arm and hand, connected with a cloth. It left the fingers open, which was good for gripping things. It protected his hands and wrist, which was good since he wasn't planning to remake his sword with a handguard anytime soon. The big jacket was a little hot, but it covered his body shape very nicely. Gray and boring, it was so bland it made you feel like you'd fall asleep just looking at it. The hood was a few sizes too big for his head, and at risk of falling off, but he could adjust that probably. Google would know how. The problem started below his hips. His sheath wasn't attached to anything, meaning unless he dropped the sheath he couldn't do any two-handed cuts. He'd need a belt to hold it in place, or a shorter sword and more one-handed sword techniques. Maybe both. His pants were, fine, not amazing, but the cargo pants could hold a lot of things without getting in the way too much. His shoes were not designed to dance around like an idiot. They were too big, and the soles weren't designed for fast and quiet moves. Some sneakers or something smaller would be great. All in all, he needed to get some belts for his sword and some new shoes. Some body armor wouldn't be unwelcome, even just cloth to reduce the pain from getting thrown into a wall by a giant sentient glob of piss. He was slightly annoyed that it hurt so much. The armor he wanted was something for his shins, if just to make him feel safer, and for his central body. A vest would suffice. He sketched in Hero Journal number 14 his ideas, chipping away at the plan until he knew what he wanted, what he didn't, and what he needed. He glanced around his room, noticing all the hero paraphernalia. One of those things he needed was money, and he was starting to get an idea of how to get it. Hero websites, places that fans of certain heroes would gather to talk about them. Merchandise for things on a specific hero sold for a higher price here. Some minor odds and ends could be sold at this for major money. Nothing big or noticeable, just minor things that were usually in his closet. He wouldn't sell them from his house, but he could prove they were in mint condition to get more money. It would take a while, but this would get him cash so that when he made his next hero suit or sword, it wouldn't be a piece of garbage like these were. Next up, scrounge up as much cash as he could find in his house and on the road and go to the thrift store. It wasn't impressive, it wasn't cool, but he was on a budget and he'd make it work. 2 thrift stores to choose from, and he took meticulous notes on what he wanted and needed. The second one even had a real katana that he took notes over for his next one, even if the blade was bent in the middle. Its teeth even gave him some ideas of how to improve his current one, like banding it with metal to help the glue stay together, or putting a groove in for the strap that would hold it to the belt. He got some beat-up sneaks with minimal holes in them and 3 belts, along with some soccer shin guards. No body armor though, unfortunately. The most important and functional part wasn't there. He could spray paint everything black to remove any sheen and make it harder to track. It was amazing what you could get if you bottomed out your standards. Back to the quirkless cave, he put everything on. The shins had been for a child probably, but fit well enough. He put them over his cargo pants to keep the pants cuffs from getting in his way. Next came the shirt, hoodie, and jacket. He used the arm bracers to cover the cuffs of his jacket to keep it out of the way of his hands before deciding that chafing wasn't his thing and rolled the sleeves up at the elbows. If he liked it, he could sew or glue it in place depending on how patient he was. The painting mask still covered his face, although with the entire ensemble he looked more like a villain than anything heroic. Still, the hood didn't block too much of his view and the mask didn't get in the way of looking down. Though, now it was time for what was probably the most important part. He waited for the jacket to be on so the bottom of it would get in the way. He needed to see how functional it'd be, and it went down to a little below the middle of his thigh. Therefore, the jacket might cover up the handle and get in the way of drawing the sword. Midoriya tightened the straps around the sword, making sure it could hold itself in place. He put on the first belt for pants, tightening until comfortable. Next, he put on a more elastic belt, hooking so it wouldn't fall off, but not currently doing anything. Finally, he attached the third belt like a cord to the sword and tied it to the second belt and pushed it inside, the elastic belt holding it in place like a holster. Sure enough, the bottom of the coat did get in the way a little bit. He moved around in his getup, feeling ridiculous and hot inside his room. The sword at his hip and loose jacket made it harder to move, but the new shoes made it easier. The shin guards didn't go low enough to get in his way. If he kept his left hand on the sword though, he could push it out of the way as he moved. He spent only 10 minutes walking without his sword drawn and the get-up before adjusting his pants and jacket, going another 10 minutes before another set of adjustments. He kept doing this off and on until it was easy, and he was too hot to care. He went back to pajamas and hit the showers, taking this time to try meditating while standing. It was just focusing on his breathing and relaxing. It stung a little to wash the new cut on his head, but he'd survive. He needed to plan out his next plan. Planning was his strong suit. If he wanted to be a real vigilante, he should help people. Would taking on that gang really be helpful? They hadn't even attacked him, but he'd heard them from the open window. Cleaning up the streets is good too. Doing community service would be good too, and less dangerous. Do I really need to do it myself? Nothing major had happened yet. Nobody had died, and if he bailed out now, he could keep it that way. But would it be as satisfying? What would help people more? The public's response to his actions was on his mind, if only because he thought about what heroes would think and hated them more. Tomorrow I'll scout them out. I'll do my research, and then I'll make my opinion. He nodded, switching the shower from hot to cold to get him focused. He had notes to take, techniques to write down and a drawing cut to practice with his amazing pencil sword. Chapter and notes. I wish I could tell what the length of these is when I'm writing them. This feels long, but I can't tell until I post it. But that's pointless. Midoriya's first fight ends in running away, a great plan when you're supposed to be recovering from fractured ribs. More questions no one asked. Why is Midoriya basically a ninja when the name of the fanfic is samurai stuff, the opposite of a ninja? Most of his talents, in my opinion, carry very well to being quiet. Moving quietly ties over with proper sword steps, since the goal of sword steps is to save energy and act as a base for the swordsmanship. Midoriya is also relatively short and in this version at least got out of most fights by not fighting, since the canon depicts him as being awful at martial combat most of the time with random tidbits of knowledge such as correctly performing a shoulder throw on Bakugo, an uncharacteristic scene of combat knowledge. Therefore, he probably learned to avoid conflict by being quiet and avoiding attention. Why is Midoriya stealing like a criminal? The lame answer is he's broke and needs materials. As lame as it is, the main difference between heroes and vigilantes is budget. Most stories make Midoriya rich and have a vast wealth and power base. That's lame. I'ma keep kicking him in the dick and make him poor. In my opinion, psychological trauma doesn't justify being rich. The Joker isn't rich because he's got trauma, he's rich cause he blows up buildings and steals everything not nailed down. Midoriya won't constantly steal probably, but he will earn his money. What's wrong with his shoes? In the canon, Midoriya has these huge red shoes that are terrible for a vigilante. In sports, you want light feet most of the time, good traction and maneuverability. Midoriya's shoes maybe have traction and fail every other category. Plus, the bright red sticks out too much. What the hell is with all the belts? The first belt keeps his pants up. The second belt is usually similar to a judo-looking belt, it's the one that holds the scabbard in place. I'm trying to be user-friendly here, not sure how many weeaboos read this and know what the hell a saya is. The second belt is a loose belt that keeps the sheath in place while letting it be maneuvered for drawing and walking around. The third belt was attached to the sheath or saya itself. This is like a lanyard card, it's so that the saya can't move too far from where it's supposed to be. The third belt is tied to the second belt. End of questions from nobody, a question from me. Should I bother to explain the martial arts behind these moves? As stated earlier, I practice Iijutsu meaning most of my knowledge is in drawing and sheathing swords. 3 of the 5 moves stated are ones I can do, with the exceptions being a good flicker and a good sideways strike. I can perform them badly, and I can Google and train to figure out what you're supposed to do and edit it back in later if I get it wrong. Not sure people like the focus on swordsmanship, but I feel it's very important in fanfictions that center around the hero defeating people with it. I hope you guys give me some feedback because this was written during classes I was bored out of my mind. Chapter 9. Chapter 9. Chapter summary. Midoriya has learned of the existence of real sword techniques and begins trying to learn one of them. So far, he's failed. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Breakfast and mediation had become a staple for Midoriya. He liked to think he was getting better at it. He sat in his room, back as straight as he could get for 10 minutes. In through the nose, out through the mouth. After that, he set back out to get back into practice. The solitude of the abandoned house was great for keeping off prying eyes, but he might run into the gang again. Instead, he set about learning in the hilly slopes of the forest. The entire ground was an uneven slope, constantly forcing him to adjust even before he made things more difficult. When you added what he hesitated to call his hero suit into the mix, staying in position became a nightmare. The shoes were smaller than he was used to, but he'd been breaking them in. The shin guards dug into his calves, he'd have to attach them directly to the pants or get better elastic. His pants were scrunched up at the knees and ankles, but that was hardly a problem. His sleeves kept rolling down, he'd need something to keep them in place. The main problem came from the jacket and the sheath. When trying to draw from the sheath, the jacket covered it so he couldn't get to the handle. When he was walking with the sword out, the sheath hit his legs and got in his way. Those two problems he didn't have any easy solutions for. The jacket was necessary to avoid suspicion and hide body armor when he got it. The sheath covered the sword and allowed him to hide it in less conspicuous things. He couldn't get rid of either. For now, he focused on just coming up with techniques to ignore that problem. He could go for a very slow grab of the sheath with his left, allowing him to slowly peel back the jacket and keep it out of the way. Otherwise, he could go for a quick messier draw. He would turn his hips to move the jacket out of the way, and before it fell back into place he'd perform his drawing cut. For the annoying sheath, he could add another belt to keep it in place. He could adjust his gait in the meantime. The shuffling walk kept the sword in place, but everything went wrong when he tried to dash. As long as his legs moved slowly, nothing would go wrong. Still, when he one-handed his sword, he could dash briefly before the loose ends of his jacket whipped back and struck him. In real swordsmanship, dashing attacks didn't seem that common. Maybe that's why fencers wore a white bodysuit, a mask, and nothing else. His accuracy also degraded when he tried to one-hand a sword. Once fluid movements became shaky as he danced, but his body still moved quickly. Still, the whiplash of his jacket helped him move his hands away from his body to keep his arms up. The annoying sting taught him, forced him to keep his guard up and at his shoulder. The stance, called Hasso no Kame, in Japan or just roof guard, in Germany. He liked the European name cause it sounded as dumb as he felt doing it. It mainly served for overhead strikes, which was great since that was the second thing he planned to learn. For now though, just drawing and sheathing. He'd draw the sword with one slash, then put his hands up out of the way of his swinging zipper that was intent on breaking his hands, and grab the blade, right grabbing the middle of the blade and left grabbing the pommel. Midoriya didn't even have time to attack before putting it back away and repeating. As he drew the sword, he'd take a step to reposition himself. The extra momentum could make for a better attack, or to put himself away from someone trying to harm him. Both were really good. His dancing steps got more and more natural as he was forced to remove the sudden acceleration from his arsenal, taking a more gradual acceleration and deceleration. It was slightly harder to breathe in the broken mask, but if he thought of it as part of the training it worked just fine. But even as he trained, he had to give in to hunger. He switched back out for lunch, wondering if he should finally try to get a new backpack just to fit all his new stuff into. Either way, there had to be a more effective way of eating than going 20 minutes walking to the woods and 20 minutes back to eat lunch, just for another 20-minute walk back. Maybe he should take up running. It'd be a useful skill, at least it wouldn't be a burden. To test this, he did a light jog and promptly felt like dying 3 minutes in. As it turns out, going from one hard workout to another was not a good idea. Running could be useful, but he'd need to be ready before he did it again. Midoriya opted for a middle ground, power walking all the way home with only 2 more breaks. He came out tired and sweaty, pulling the same trick as always but was greeted by 2 women instead of the one he was ready for. Mitsuru, mother of Katsuki Bakugo, was sitting with his mom. She waved hello as he came in. Good to see you, Izuku. Somebody's been working out She smiled coyly, and Midoriya just smiled and nodded along. The 2 women got back to talking, leaving him to sneak his stuff away and get some food for himself. They weren't talking about much. Husbands, sons, life. Midoriya listened for a bit as he ate, then gave up and focused on meditation. Soon he'd be back in school, but before then he wanted to investigate that gang. The homeless district was a good place to start, the residents might have some information for him. Then he'd go in and see what they did, maybe look up rumors about them. The funny thing was he still wasn't sure what gang they were. A little preparation made everything else go more smoothly, so no point in not checking it out. His meditation seemed to go so quickly these days. He stretched some more, something he was still upset that he couldn't do the lotus pose that he thought was supposed to be easy. He could barely get himself in position, let alone hold it. Even the half lotus pose was hard for him to hold. Little did he know it wasn't as easy as he thought, but he was right about the whole being talentless thing. He went back in his outfit, feeling ridiculous until he saw some patrolling heroes. If he thought he was dumb looking with his muted grays and blacks, they took the cake. Part of his hero epiphany was he was now able to look at how objectively stupid some of these heroes looked. He barely noticed the worried glances they gave him, some of the rookies urging each other to go and talk to the seemingly dangerous criminal. He'd realized his hair would stick out and be a solid way to find him, so he tied it up out of the way and under the hood. Since it was a bright day, some sunglasses weren't out of place. His hood dwarfed his head, and the body armor painted black with model paint didn't reflect any light. Completing the look was the strange black bag stick he carried. Too thin to be a gun, it looked very conspicuous whatever it was. He didn't even flinch when he saw them though. They could hear him laugh as he quietly slunk by them, not bothering with second glances. Should we call him in, or just ask for an alert? Smile Man questioned his boss. Smiley meant no affiliation. He's not doing anything illegal, but an alert wouldn't be out of place, he said with a nod. We need to stay vigilant in case something goes wrong, and it looks like it might be something big. Classes were still in session, so who'd think the punk walking along was a middle schooler? With the forward posture and baggy clothes, it was hard to tell what he was. Still, for some reason crime in the homeless district had a harder time for the next week with no clue as to why. Those ruffians. Who calls gangsters ruffians? They're all up to no good. Gunshots sometimes go off in the night. I'm telling you these streets aren't safe. The old homeless man kept going on and on while Midoriya politely nodded. He still hadn't gotten a name, just that the homeless people didn't like them and thought the gang was doing something illegal. So did he, but real heroes acted on more than intuition. Psychopaths are the ones who fight just because their intuition told them to. He still took notes in a small notepad. Some of the gibberish they said might come together to form a picture. If you have enough dirt, you're bound to get a rock in there somewhere. He said his farewells and left the man who smelled suspicious like alcohol to his possible drinking. How did a homeless person even didn't want to know. He was going to keep going when he noticed the large, suspiciously rich homeless people. He could tell by the pieces they carried, holstered as if to show them off. Guns, to make gunshots that go off in the night. And tell me these streets aren't safe. What is this? An instant callback. They looked like they meant business, and as he took to the shadows several people came to the building. Taking a peek at the sun, it was about the time he'd been found last time. The building he'd been in was en route to here from the livelier part of the city, that's why he'd found it. Overall, it made sense, the gang wasn't just wandering around after lunch. They might have been trying to come here. He ghosted along the streets, going around as to not just cross the street. Midoriya slipped through alleyways, before re-emerging closer to the building. He bet his luck in the third-story fire escape, below the roof in case someone was on it and sufficiently high enough most people wouldn't notice the darker shape in the window across the alley. He hunkered down, waiting until he saw a familiar group. The man who asked his crew to find and beat him, still smoking. His breath was purple, a quirk. If the color quirk theory was to be believed, it was some sort of toxin. Judging by the dried-out skin around his mouth, possibly dehydration. Or just bad personal hygiene. He did get a tattoo to look at though. More things for the sketchbook. His position wasn't close enough to monitor what they were saying, but they didn't look happy. The first guy he'd taken down, the stairs guy, looked like he sprained his wrist. Ouch. They went inside, yelling at the guy in front. They were so loud he caught that. You don't recognize Toxin Love. Beat it, bucko, before I leave you a husk. Somebody hit something, and multiple footsteps disappeared. A minute later, coughing, mostly likely the door guy. Toxin Love, a strange name. Toxic Love was the name of a song, but maybe another gang had thought of that one first. More for the notes. Was it his name, or the group's name? Who'd announce their group's name so easily? Regardless of how dumb it was, all went into the notes. After 20 minutes, the last of the people showed up. At least 3 biker gangs, as there were already bikes parked haphazardly, and then 2 more groups showed up. One cussed out the other, throwing the generic bike mask down while yelling about nearly crashing. He punted it into a different alley. How sweet, a gift. For me. That was the last group to go in. He seemed to flow down the wall, climbing the bricks and dumpsters easily. He'd done this all the time when he was running away from Bakugo, and back then he was on a time crunch. Now he had all the time in the world. Midoriya slid out of the alley as if he owned it, walking across the street into the other alley, and kicked the helmet like a ball until he thought he was a safe distance away. He didn't even look around as if he was scared to death. One of the gangsters saw this and was going to beat him to death and recognize him and then kill him and then torture him ando. Oh. Looking at the helmet, it was obvious why he ditched it. The visor had a crack in it, probably from his latest accident, at least until he felt how cold it was. What was with his luck and ice quirks these days? Still, a visor could be replaced. Into the suspiciously yellow backpack it went, he could tuck his clothes inside it. He didn't bother returning to his perch, instead walking back to the main road to inquire about the gangsters a little more. He got to do this for only 20 minutes before something new stopped him. What do you think you doing here, emo boy? A gruff man, over 7 feet tall. You know whose turf you walking on. Show some respect. This is Toxin Love's place, and we don't take kindly to strangers. His arms were crossed, dressed in a tank top and army cargos. Thick as a wall, Midoriya wasn't sure a surprise attack would do shit against him. What are you, mute? Listen, short stack, take off the stupid mask, and look when someone's talking to ya. He grabbed the mask, and Midoriya let the large man pull him forward. The added momentum, along with the big man leaning down, was what he needed. The large man leaned forward to grab the mask and try to pull it off, bringing his center of mass down. Midoriya went with the motion to bring the wrapped-up katana into his chin. The man didn't seem to have much of a reaction, but he did let go. He rubbed his chin, which looked fine as Midoriya unraveled the top of the black garbage bag containing his katana. You got spunk, kid, I'll give you that. You looking for a gang? I might take you, but first Midoriya didn't even adjust his stance as he did a drawing cut at the man. It cut across his pecs, then shifted into a quick but awkward thrust, getting a few centimeters into the muscle before backing out. He resheathed his sword as he shifted back half a step, now in what could barely be called a sword stance. The man flinched at the cut, rolling his shoulder to work out the pain. Talkative. Midoriya thought he would have stopped talking by now. This time, it was a true drawing cut. He stepped in and off-center as the man swung a fist at where he had been, going for a horizontal drawing slice. His left foot had been in the lead, but as he stepped in for the cut he brought his right forward and wide, pushing off with his left to move his centerline away from the counterattack. His shoulder went mostly straight back as the elbow and wrist freed the sword again. Again, the sword tip pierced, forming an X-shaped wound on his chest. Again, at the end of the attack, Midoriya added more weight to stab his shoulder. Then, to add insult to injury, instead of pulling straight back and out he turned the stab into a slash, gouging out more flesh. As a finale, he brought the sheath down like a club on the already injured shoulder. He switched from holding the top to holding the bottom, taking another adjustment step to bring himself out of the man's range. Already his quirk was activating, turning his clothes gray, he confidently went for his own knife, a terrible move when facing someone with a sword. With the man's good arm out of the way, there'd be no counterattack. Midoriya brought the sword up again, mimicking the motion of the drawing cut and wishing he had another good attack. Instead, he didn't pierce the man again, slamming into the man's windpipe. An illegal move in almost any competition and one not trained in most dojos, since it could possibly be a killing blow. Midoriya was confident he was far too weak to kill anyone, but it hurt like a bitch. He stopped being confident and started trying to breathe. His throat felt hot and constricted. The insides could swell up and choke him if he'd been hit too hard. He started to gasp and wheeze, bringing up no guard and sputtering around right there. Just how stupid is this gang? Another free hit. Midoriya clocked him in the side of the head with his patent-pending baseball sleepy time special attack. There was an anticlimactic thunk as it domed the dipshit, and he fell face first into the ground. Midoriya flipped him with a boot as the man's clothes returned to their former colors, and losing a strange sheen they had. Maybe a quirk that turns cloth into metal. If he just focused he could have blocked most of the attacks at the start. He really is a dipshit. He patted him down for the knife but instead ended up taking out a piece of cloth in the shape of a knife. It did support his theory at least. He left the knife with him and used the guy's phone to call emergency services, leaving it in him there as he wandered away, covering his crappy sword with the trash bags again. Midoriya switched back into his normal clothes and went back out on the streets to head home. He only got 2 blocks before somebody new stopped him. What do you people think this is, a freeway? He was thin as rails with a slight goatee, dressed in a big stuffy jacket like Midoriya had been. Midoriya apologized and sidestepped. Sorry sir, I'll be on my way. Quote. Sir, the thin man stopped, snarling down at him. He turned, driving his knee into Midoriya's back, including some of his already damaged ribs. I'm a girl brat. Shit, kids these days. She stormed off while Midoriya had a nice personal time with the concrete before hobbling away. It was unknown who called the cops on the gang meeting or took out one of the guards, but it was promised that they'd be torn apart. Midoriya was just glad to get away without the cops he called catching up to him. When he called them, he had covered his hand with his shirt so there wouldn't be any fingerprints if someone checked. There definitely weren't any cameras or witnesses, or else they'd have beaten him to a pulp long before he practically crawled out. He made some excuse about his back hurting and went into his room, not entirely untrue. That lady had hit uncomfortably close. He took deep breaths while stretching his back, then looking up from his sitting position. A few things popped as he used his bed to push against his back. Maybe not healthy, but felt pretty good. His costume wasn't terrible, his jacket had taken the knee pretty well, his gloves didn't mess with his grip and the few steps he took were nice and easy, even if this was a little violent for a scouting mission. Seriously, I do almost everything right and get blindsided by something completely irrelevant. He laughed at himself. This was the real thing. He could actually die if his opponent wasn't going to call emergency services. He could go to jail if the police or heroes found out he carved up some dude, even if it was self-defense. Most self-defense didn't involve one person using a sword. Still, something inside him enjoyed it. Even if that guy had the survival senses of a wall. He rubbed his back and went to the showers. He was going to be back in school soon. He'd look up what he found tomorrow and go scout them out more. It was time to wrap things up. Chapter and notes. Yiggity yeet. This story took like 6 hours and most of that was distractions. Windows have been opened, dishes have been broken, trash has been taken out and windows have been reopened. A lot has changed. I have changed. I have one less dish to eat junk food on, technically a change. Finally, Midoriya lost a thought. It's weird that this is what I was looking forward to. Most fanfics have the main hero either never lose, or the loss isn't significant. Why not flare up an injury that will make the incoming raid harder while having your main hero faceplant? That way you've got so many reasons to make fun of him. I now feel a reason to justify every weird victory, and this one comes down to a collection of random facts I learned today. Did you know most people freeze up the first time they think they're in a real life or death scenario? The more interesting part is that it goes away the more life or death situations you've been in, meaning the longer you last the better your odds of surviving. Another thing is the human reaction to being stabbed. Most people don't really know what to do and sort of seize up. The shock can delay the pain sensation, but usually, it feels hot. Final few things. Victims of violence can become desensitized to it, which is why Midoriya doesn't suffer from this as much. Through constant exposure it dies down, especially depending on the people around you's reaction to it. It is one of the reasons why victims of abuse have a high chance of becoming abusers. If your life is at constant risk, you gradually stop being scared by it and don't think as badly of inflicting it on other people or lesser forms. The guard he uses has 3 different names, and I don't mention the English one because I found it the least weird and funny. In Japan this guard is known as Hasso no Kame, roughly translating to all 8 directions and is a basic kendo stance. In Germany it's called right bomb tag, but this fanfic isn't about German styles that much, so I just use the roughly translated name, roof guard. The last name is the English one. In an earlier version of this chapter, I accidentally said roof guard was the English name. The correct English name is ref. I dropped the ball on that. Last one, we're going to be getting to the cheesy hero part where I start naming his attacks. Partially because the name, lunging two-handed overhead cut, is going to give my fingers arthritis if I have to type it every time he does it. I could abbreviate it, but I want to name it funny dumb things like the hero's super move. I also find the image of someone pretending normal attacks are super moves. Chapter 10. Chapter 10. Chapter Summary. The First Raid. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Midoriya swiftly got out of bed and into the kitchen. 3 days until he went back to school. His ribs were now killing him all over again though, and it didn't help that after that lady kicked him he'd fallen back on them again. Right up till that point, he thought he'd be breaking his own recovery record of 24 days. Now, 6 weeks didn't seem so unreasonable, at least from where he was sitting. His mom wasn't up yet, somebody had to pay the bills, so he went back to his room and meditated for 10 and hit the computer. He had 3 days, it wouldn't kill him to get some online research. He loaded up his VPN so nobody would track him down and murder him and started poking around about Toxin Love. Back in his fanboy days that made him sound old. He had often researched the more obscure details and hidden stories. He just wanted to do it in a much shorter time. He'd post his questions now and hopefully hook in some responses by the next day. First, he'd search for what was already up. Gang violence in my area, then focus on the members and look for common signs or important people. Hero arrest records were posted to show off, and cross-referencing the district with the time and a certain type of crime, he could find out details easily. Heroes were patrolling the area, so some of the crime had to be dealt with. Scanning through, there were many records of noise complaints that heroes had to investigate that might have been gunshots. Not a good sign for a swordsman. In the criminal organization department, there were at least 6. He wasn't sure how many he could take down, but definitely not 6. Probably not even 1. The best case right now, weaken it until it collapsed. Still, it didn't hurt to pry a little bit. For the gang Toxin Love, they had a penchant for dealing drugs in the form of cigarettes. Guess they did have some valuable stuff on them after all. Midoriya thought back to the people he frisked only to find nothing but cigarettes. Turning in that stuff could probably have helped take down this whole thing. Now that was a reasonable goal. Find somebody who'd probably have it, make an anonymous report and turn it in, and the government would take it down. Who gives a shit about credit? He could stop wanting to carry a weapon every time he went to that part of town. The gang itself was 2 years old, pretty young all things considered. Not the youngest, but only one away. Its main strength seemed to be how many people it had, which stacked up with how it went for him. Lots of idiots were arrested for stupid things, and they were suspected to be members of Toxin Love. Lot of dumb people to make up for the lack of skill. Midoriya switched gears, posting his questions about the area and the gang under his more generic not main accounts. He didn't want it to be linked straight to him, that had bad idea written all over it. Instead, he searched public forums and poked around, only asking a question if he had to in what he thought was a roundabout way. Finally, when he'd posted across 17 different forums and blogs, he threw in the towel for now. He checked up on the things he'd posted about selling, surprised as there were already offers for a third of what was now junk to him. He agreed and went through with the packaging process on his own, googling everything to make sure it was ready before sorting everything to go out in one. This crap wouldn't make him rich, but they were definitely overpaying in his opinion. Not that he cared, he just wanted their money right now. Midoriya took it himself and shipped it all off with the yen in his pocket before going back to his room. Today was definitely a recovery day. Getting back, he went straight into stretches to help relax his body, then a 30-minute meditation. Each breath felt crisp, and warmth filled his body. Biologically, it accelerated the heart while not working most of the muscles to give him a faster blood flow and speed up the healing process while helping him think more clearly. After he was done meditating, he set about learning a second attack. With vigor, he grabbed his esteemed pencil sword with one hand and flipped open his notes with the other. Straight back, slight bend in the legs and hands at shoulder height. A few calming breaths in this pose for focus. While standing still, his left leg was the lead, but for the sword stroke, his lead leg switched, pushing off and landing the same time the sword came down. The slight off balance would put more of his weight into the attack and make him lean into it. It'd hit hard if it hit, and he'd get hit hard if it didn't. His arms were supposed to come away from his body. At a minimum, the handguard should be at eye level. The sword could be leaning forward slightly and mostly up, or backward to get more power. Holding it up and forward kept the wrists bent, taking away a major source of power but a faster attack. The smaller cut was actually the flicker cut, a small stinging cut with very similar motions. But he wasn't here to learn that yet. For the lunging two-handed overhead cut, the sword would be pointing behind the swordsman. As the sword came down, the swordsman would lunge forward and switch legs, going off to one side as they did. This was to avoid a head-on clash and to evade a counterattack when it came. The inside of the elbows and forearms turned inward as the sword came down to lock the arms without straining them. The right wrist would bend downward to get more force behind it, and there was a certain hand motion with this attack. When doing a proper attack, one hand gripped the middle of the handle and the other gripped the pommel. The dominant hand was the one in the middle of the grip, but the one that aimed the blade was the one on the pommel. By gripping the pommel and using leverage, attack power was easier to generate and the direction was easier to control. This attack seemed to be about outright crushing the opponent. The sword was to be brought almost straight down. The body would lean forward. It was a bit awkward because, even without the weight of the sword, he nearly fell forward several times. It was quite the ankle workout to not stumble straight into a wall. It was the natural pairing with the drawing cut due to the drawing cut leaving the sword in the perfect position for a lunging two-handed overhead cut. It was a two-hit combo that could be paired with the flicker to switch things up and use a light and quick attack in place of a larger heavier one. If he learned the upward cut and the flicker cut, he'd have an entire combination he could work. Well, of attacks, still didn't have any real parries. That was probably the next thing he needed to learn, or maybe another stance. Midoriya kept drilling the LTHOC, getting tired much more quickly than he'd have thought he would. Probably the fault of shifting all his weight around and using so much of his body. The DC also used his legs, but it was more of a step. The name said it all, this was more of a lunge. The meditation helped get him back into focus, and the breathing helped keep his heartbeat fast but not out of control. He could partially maintain it now while doing his DC. Still he cycled, once again putting off lunch. One of these days he was probably going to cut it entirely but grabbed a quick bite to eat with his mom. After this, he intended to spend his last day with her as thanks for putting up with him. She deserved a medal or something for it. But he didn't have any medals, not right now anyway. Back to his room to keep practicing the LTHOC, back to meditating, back to planning. He'd sneak in, steal some packages, maybe cause a racket and get the police to come to investigate. If he could get out before the cops arrived but left them a reason to search, they'd arrest the whole gang probably while he bailed. The plan put a smile on his face, hoping he didn't need to do a thing, but knowing he would definitely have to. After swinging a pencil all day, sitting down and checking the internet to see what he got was relaxing. He ran a quick check on the forums, finding a response on an old crime report forum chat. The whole website was garbage and basically unchecked, and Midoriya was pretty sure it wasn't originally about heroism. Just a guess going by the illicit pictures he'd blocked the first day he found it. His nickname on here was R. Somehow it allowed one-letter names, but it was that raw garbage quality that made this website fun. It barely functioned at the best of times, and it seemed to be the best of times. The chat he posted his question in was lively. There's a gang called Toxin Love, are they famous for anything? Do they often have large daily meetings? Sad face R. Do it F1 if you nerd heard Tox LV. BNCH of JNKEs. Dr. Drive they mostly do drug deals using their own brand of cigarettes they don't have a central source so they aren't arrested. IAMTHERE large meetings, like regularly. Most gangs have meetings monthly to regroup and organize, but not daily. There was other stuff, but that was the major stuff. The drugs he'd found out about on his own, but the meeting stuff was new. If he was going to be a vigilante though, it was things he needed to learn. He scrolled through the rest trying to find something else relevant, settling at the bottom again. Do it F1 IPY0R UCTHMHVBG meet. Where at fam? IAMTHERE are they still having those meetings right now? They might be planning to start dealing out of district. DVL dull if they still in district, it'll be easy find. I find M and hit tomorrow. Don't do anything reckless, please. They are one of the larger gangs in the area, even if they're not good at fighting. Sad face R. Their sheer numbers make them more dangerous than they seem. He didn't think anything of it as he turned off the computer and went back to practicing his drills, anxious as he tried to mix his breathing with his 2 attacks. 2 days until he was back in school. A big breakfast today, 20 minutes stretching, 20 minutes breathing. A quick run to the forest to switch out and practice real quick in costume. The sheath and jacket didn't get too much in the way of his lunging 2-handies lunge. It was easier to call it that for now. His steps had once been hard to maintain, now it was almost natural. His body always felt centered. Well, as his near faceplants last night proved, almost always. There were a lot more color-coded knuckleheads today, a little more police than average, but a lot more heroes. Namely, any. Usually, the only heroes here were on patrol, but today they seemed intent to just stick around. Midoriya avoided all of them like the plague. He went straight for the hideout from last time with the same place, same vantage point. The dark colors helped blend into the dark grimy window he was using as a chair. He watched as people came and went, noticing that the heroes didn't seem to come this far in. Kind of counterintuitive. The usual gangs were here, at least one of the biker gangs from last time. He didn't even know Japan had biker gangs until last time and the occasional wave of mooks. This was probably more than just Toxin Love. If what he remembered of the chat was true, this seemed to be a big meeting that required a lot of planning. This meant lots of security, lots of important people, lots of ways to fuck it all up. But if the heroes pulled up, lots of easy arrests. He did see someone try to sneak in. They were trying way too hard, making them stick out more. The best hiding came second nature, barely forced. The weird skimpy succubus costume didn't help. She got sent on her way quickly, it was pretty fun to watch. 20 minutes later, same story. Some dude in a lab coat this time. Barely looked like he knew what hiding was with that white lab coat, would have stuck out less if it was neon. Also got a stiff lip and a kick on the way out. There were only 2 doormen. They had hour-long shifts, and wouldn't shut the fuck up, making it easy to tell when they were gonna switch. The last group came, or at least they were the last group 2 days ago. The biker gang parked, the icy dude whose helmet he stole was still pissed, and they stormed inside. The shift changed, the old losers went inside, and Midoriya shifted up to the roof of the building. He'd heard the 2 guys up here and was prepared for them. The roof's shifts were different than the bottoms. There were only 2, and this guy had another hour before he switched. What was the turtle guy's quirk? Who knows? He didn't notice Midoriya scale the wall and hang off by just his fingertips before rolling over the edge, hiding behind an air conditioner as he took the cover off his sword and attached it to his belt. Then he calmly and quietly approached the turtle man, steps fluid as water. He approached from behind, holding the bag in his hands. When he believed he was close enough, the bag flipped up and over his head, Midoriya pulling the bag back and kicking out his leg to force him down. There was muffled screaming, but Midoriya ignored it for now. This guy, like almost everyone, was bigger than him. However, right now, he was panicking. If Turtle Boy landed shell up, doing anything else to him was going to be a problem. Instead, he arched his back and pulled himself off the ground by the bag around the man's face, pulling him back and down. He nearly landed on top of Midoriya, but as the bag came off he performed a soccer-style goalie right into the man's noggin. He was dazed but not down, so a second kick sorted him right. Midoriya stood to one side awkwardly afterward, waiting to see if he was knocked out. He started to cautiously back away, but the second he saw the man's arm twitch he gave him one last kick and scampered away. When 2 minutes passed with no movements, Midoriya worked up the courage to search his body. No cigarettes, but a radio he turned off and pocketed. On his hip, there was the game changer. 6 hour, a piece of gray metal that spit lead. If Turtle Boy here had a brain, this could have been over in a second. He had to meditate on the spot to regain his cool. It took a while, but the thought of getting a bullet between the eyes wasn't nice for anyone. Still, he slipped on rubber gloves to cover his prints atop his bracers and put the weaponry in the bag. He wasn't planning on using it, but he'd have to be nuts to leave someone with this stuff. The front guards had just settled in and weren't expecting anything. Midoriya really did think about climbing down the wall above them and landing on them, but that was just a quick way to break his knees. No superhero landings for quirkless rats. This rat scampered down the building and into its favorite alley. One last rundown of his kid and the masked figure took to the street. It stuck close to the building, listening to the conversation. 2 targets, one 10 feet away at the chair. The other's voice is projecting to hear, so he's facing this direction. Wait for the first one to distract him. Take out the closer one. No, kicking over his chair would do just fine and deal with the standing one. Rush him, drawing cut into LTHOC. Turn back and kick the already down chair guy. Something approached from behind the 2, giving off a strange choked vibe almost as if nothing was there. The shoes made no sound, cloaked by the duo's conversation. Finally, a burst of speed to build up momentum. The closer one was sitting on a plastic stacking chair. The figure grabbed it by the top and pulled it while his leg stopped behind one of the chair legs. He added a rough left hook to the man's face, giving the man the momentum to fall backward and crack his skull painfully on the concrete. He then turned and immediately dashed into the drawing cut. The second man had turned to face him, his hair turning green and wispy but not backing up. Midoriya stepped past him, the drawing cut slamming into the side of his head. The man's head whipped, not lethal, he wasn't even down yet. He's so intent on his quirk he didn't prepare for an attack. What do? The LTHOC hit him just above the ear. He looked out like a light, but his quirk didn't deactivate, so he was still up. Only first-year hero students would fall for that. He stepped up to the crumpled criminal and did another kick. Swordsmanship was good and all, but he didn't really have any moves to hit someone when they're down. Midoriya's next move was going to be a better kick. But for now, repetition would do nicely. The villain swore as he tried to get up, only to get kicked again. It was a pretty lame sight, and basically just bullying, but he went down, so who cared? Chair Guy was out cold. Midoriya tore Chair Guy's shirt to dress his bleeding head, then made up an odd-looking thing to tie his hands up. Taking more of what was a shirt, same story for the other guy. They had more walkie-talkies, more things to turn off. Still no cigarettes, but more guns for the bag. Some cash, but he wasn't trying to be a thief. Inside their wallets were multiple IDs, and one had an address. He copied it down and took off his searching rubber gloves before opening the door for himself and heading inside the lion's den. Chapter End Notes. Yiggity Eat was supposed to go up Monday. It went way too late by me, so here it is now. Hope you all enjoy Midoriya's first crime, since everything I can remember in my sleep-deprived state right now is self-defense taken to the extreme. Other than beating up drunk people. That was definitely, probably illegal unless you look at intent to harm, which no one does, and now I'm using lawyer speak. First points first, Midoriya's network. Every underground hero needs a good network, and no one gives away quite as much information as the fans. It's stated in canon that he browses a lot of forums, but we never see it pay off in anything useful yet in the show. I don't read mangoes because I am illiterate. Second, I rip the chat room off. It's been 3 years since I first started reading fanfics, so if I'm being real, can't really cite my source anymore. Sorry, not sure it looks good. If I do it again, I'm going to do some research on how other fanfics handle it to make it look better. Or maybe that one should look intentionally bad since it is a shitshow of a website. Third, I must stop there. Real sword technique number 2, the infamous to me lunging two-handed overhead cut. I can usually get a lot of words and letters up real fast, but that name is a pace killer. I was going to switch to calling it the overhead cut, but a flicker cut can also be a cut that goes over your head. Two-handed is shared by almost every cut he knows of right now, the exception being drawing cut, and lunging is performed for the sideways cut. So without all of the things except maybe two-handed, you might mix up which attack is which. Besides its name, it's also Midoriya's first killing blow. This is basically the same technique used by someone beheading someone else at a chopping block with an axe, so no real surprise there. The sidestep is the only real difference between that and the LTHOC, since the sidestep is a defensive move. More random news, Midoriya will start branching out away from swordsmanship and into very bare bones unarmed combat. He will be learning kicks, something I never formally learned, and will be breaking my hips for a bit to figure out. I like Midoriya's analyze them to death fighting style we see when he tries to rescue Bakugo. We don't see it often because usually Midoriya is the one getting ambushed, but I think I've shown how much I like fighting like a dick and ambushing everything. Final thoughts, the guns the Goonies have is the Sig Sauer P220 because I looked up the most generic handguns in Japan and that's what I got. I could have switched up the names and pretended technology has marched on, but I think one of the most fitting things in MHA is that, if you look at it, all technological advancements stop dead. No flying cars, no 6 grams internet, nothing. Unless, that is, it's related to professional heroes. I find that hilarious and will try to stick with it. Chapter 11. Chapter Summary. Midoriya has entered the hideout and gathering place of 6 different gangs while they are having a meeting. Truly, he didn't think this through. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. It looked like someone hadn't fixed the lights in 50 years. Half the hall was dark, and the other half was flickering between that and dim. There were people in here, some giving him glances as he came in. Midoriya invoked his inner Kachan, that parts he admired about Bakugo, and didn't even look at them. One hand on his sword, he walked straight past them. Some people started down at the cloaked figure, some kept right on jabbering away. He wasn't really sure what to do now, but he just kept heading straight forward. The hallway snaked and turned, and it didn't take too long before he was seemingly alone. It was hard to tell with the bad lighting, but this place was built like a maze. There were cameras, but who knew if they still worked? Probably not, since no one had bothered him on his way in. The walls and ceiling were falling to pieces, the building itself blocking the camera for him even if it did work. Midoriya took to the wall like a spider, scaling up the rusted cabinets and cracked walls mostly silently. He reached and stuck to the ceiling, sitting on the rafters and taking a minute to breathe and calm himself down. Some of those guys in the halls might have had guns, he didn't get a good look. It was ironic, his biggest threat wasn't the heroes or villains with flashy quirks but goons with a trigger finger. He sat up there for 5 or 6 minutes before he heard them talking about something unconscious. They'd either found the roof guy or the two out front, it was too hard to tell. The echo messed with his hearing. Footsteps came down the hall towards him and Midoriya adjusted, hiding atop of a cabinet that ran almost to the ceiling he'd been hiding in. A little hard listening gave away it was only one dude. He grabbed one of the ammo magazines from his bag, tossing it to check the weight, and underhanded it further down the hall just before the Goonie turned the corner. The mag echoed as it struck the floor but blended into the dim lighting, making it hard to tell what was what. He heard his new friend stop, calling out with a gun raised. "Who's dat? Step out, I don't want no trouble." His new butt inched forward as Midoriya grabbed the rafters and planted his feet. The cabinet had shaken when he tried to use it to climb, so it wasn't exactly stable. He waited until he could see both the man's nose and back of his head before kicking it over atop him and pulling himself back into the rafters in one motion. There was a scream and gunshots as the man tried to stop a falling cabinet with bullets. With a thud and a crack, Midoriya's new friend was out like a light. Midoriya moved back towards the corner, climbing along the strangely open rafters. The dim lighting and partially open area would have been godly if he was good at parkour. As of now, he'd move 10 feet and take a break for 5 or so minutes. Sure enough, another guy came eventually. They didn't seem to have radios unless they were on duty, only semi-important goons got that. Meaning they had to go in person to report what was happening. Eventually, they'd wise up and stop going one by one. Until then, it was smooth pickings. The second guy got a light dropped on his head. One end had already been frayed, so Midoriya cut the stronger one in advance and held it up with one hand, sword ready to cut the other when someone walked under him. He was lucky it was so wide, it cut number 2 on the shoulder instead of the head. He collapsed, the ground gave him a concussion, sending him to count little gangster sheep or something. That seemed to be the end of the easy street though. 4 guys came through in. Wait, that left 2 guys in the other room. The 4 barely took a second to examine the knocked out Goonies before running along. They didn't even check for a pulse, the dicks. Midoriya gracefully dropped and ungracefully landed a minute after they went. Who knows how long they'd be, but his ankle was now killing him. No more fancy jumps for today. He massaged it as he hobbled to Goonie number 2 and stripped him. The generic jumpsuit fit well enough, and it still had a hood. Part of the reason he chose number 2. He checked his stuff and added both the goons' guns and ammo to this soon-to-be full collection, then went back holding his sword unstrapped. He tried his best to mimic what of the voice he remembered, an angry small man cursing everyone for forcing him to go out. Ow me neck, it hurts to talk like this. You too, have you seen? What's his face? Saggy. He didn't know the other guy's name. He checked his wallet. He approached the 2 goons with no mask on, banking on the bad lighting to hide his face. I saw almost everyone except Saggy on the way back, he air. The other 2 looked at each other. Why's no one back yet? Midoriya shrugged. Sayin they don't trust me, gotta do it himself. Was a point of wasting me time any age. He shook his head, then looked at the stick in his hand, seeming to remember something. Oh, I did fin this. Ya recognize. He shook it enticingly, purposefully bringing them in closer to try and get a look at what he was holding. Stop shukan ya twa. Midoriya's loose posture tightened as he drew the blade in one motion, catching Goonie 1 in the side of the head as he stepped toward Goonie 2. This set up his next attack, the lunging 2. This set up his next attack, attack 2. The man was starting to take a step back, putting himself in the range of attack 2. Midoriya chased after him with the sword overhead as he reached for his gun. Pros didn't need to look at their weapon before drawing, it was something Midoriya had to master to effectively surprise attack. However, it was clear this guy wasn't a pro in anything except getting his ass handed to him by a middle schooler. The sword slammed straight down the middle, the point cutting into the forehead while the blunt blade broke his nose. He then pressed onward, doing another attack 2 into the still stuttering Goonie 1. With both of them on their asses, he just kept soccer kicking them until both stopped moving. One had kept trying to go for the gun, and Midoriya might have broken his hand by stomping on it. Another quick frisk, and still no sign of cigarettes. He cursed his past self, they had been so close. If he just put them into his bag and researched what they were, he wouldn't have to be here. Instead though, there was an upside. 2 sets of low-quality body armor, 3 including the one he frisked from the guy stuck naked under a fallen light. It didn't fit and was kinda heavy, but that could be solved later. Midoriya dragged it all outside and put it in his usual hidey hole. In the building across the alley, there was a dark grimy window you could reach from the fire escape. You had to jump to reach it, but even if you missed you just landed in the trash bag that was overflowing from years of neglect and smelled like dog shit. Better than breaking your bones. He left the body armor and guns there, hoping it was a weird enough spot the police wouldn't check. He had on his signature rubber grabber gloves when he moved it, so it shouldn't be traced back to him, but it was a great find. He could hear a commotion on the rooftop, looks like the last of his unconscious friends had been found. Midoriya took a moment to listen before going in and up to his new second home, the rafters. They were exposed almost everywhere, making a second street. There were another 2 feet of space between them and what might have been the next floor, so if you crawled on top it was easy pickings. Midoriya scurried like a rat along them, listening and breathing as it took another 10 minutes before people showed up. Some looked familiar, so some of the 4 had come back to the entrance. There were 7 now, 2 seemed important. One was one of the biker people, judging by what he thought the outfit was. These dim lights didn't favor anyone. Aye, get your asses outside. If my bike is damaged, the least of your worries it'll be the dipshit. Man, this ice quirk guy kept coming back. He gave a free helmet, he was constantly loud, he was probably important enough to have the cigarettes. He massaged his ankle as he watched 3 of the Goonies go out until Iceman shouted again and 2 more followed, leaving him with 1 henchman. This one seemed to be his right-hand man, making this guy probably one of the 6 leaders he'd heard about. Do you think the heroes are infiltrating us? There were probably 2, one taking the front entrance and the other the roof. The front entrance took out a lot more people, so probably a more aggressive hero. Up top. Eraserhead, he's had a bone to pick with us, and for a teacher he's got too much free time. If it's you too, we got this. He took out a cigarette, the kind Midoriya was looking for, and pointed outside. So long as nobody else gets out, we're golden. He lit the cigarette and smiled, offering his minion some. You want any? Quirk enhances feel gray at. Midoriya blinked as the henchman declined. That seems a little important to just call a drug. Do people know about this? The henchman didn't wait for his internal monologue to catch up. I'll be stationed here, so when reinforcements come for the heroes they have to deal with me. Don't worry sir. Iceman laughed, patting him on the shoulder. That's my boy. Knew he couldn't trust these toxic lovers to keep it together. His henchman didn't bother to correct him as he walked away. The henchman began to search the bodies for whatever was missing, diverting his attention and focusing on the bodies in front of him. Midoriya took this time to adjust his position, giving a rough calculation of trajectory. He'd fallen from this high up before, he'd even done it today. The landing part was the hardest now, and practice made perfect. Still, he waited for the opportunity he wanted. He didn't have to wait long. The people outside started talking to somebody, shouting at them to hit the road. Henchman's attention was split and that was the moment Midoriya landed on him like a ton of bricks, back first. He would have gone feet first, but his ankle told him if he tried that he'd be in a wheelchair for a while. It wasn't that hard, with the guns and ammo magazines gone, but that was better for Midoriya's back. Henchman, however, had to deal with the weight of a small child landing on him. Midoriya hit him center mass and sort of flop rolled off immediately, while Henchman fell backward and stumbled before catching himself. Without giving either of them a moment pause, Midoriya pressed ahead. He kept his right side forward until the last second, giving some extra momentum to the drawing cut. It tore through the air with a hiss, striking the man's lead arm and creating a narrow gash. Midoriya turned his whole body to face the man and stepped to his own right as he swung with attack 2, the man raising the same arm and screaming as it was hit. The tip had created a second gouge, the blunt sword hit like a steel bat. He attempted to grab the sword as Midoriya breathed in through his nose deeply, calming himself and stepping back into the wall. The henchman shook his arm, letting it freeze over like armor. It was vaguely familiar, and Midoriya wasn't sure he liked where it remembered it from. All that for a shrimp with some dull-ass blade. The other guy better be Alma. Midoriya had almost let him finish 2 sentences. He was getting rusty, and he wasn't sure he'd ever been sharp. With his good ankle, he kicked off the wall like a starting block, going for another downward slice. The henchman raised his arm as ice coated it, catching the blade. It still went down under the impact, but not very far. Henchman formed an ice gauntlet to punch him in the head as Midoriya attempted to pull the sword out. It seemed to be stuck fast to his arm, and this man was stronger than him. Still, he had dealt with arm-focused quirks all his life. The area of the threat was smaller but more centered on the body than what he was used to. Midoriya put his entire into pulling the sword, trying to walk backward. Henchman went with it, pushing him into the wall so his punch couldn't miss. Any other tricks, hero? This guy thinks someone who'd tackle him from above and try to cut his arm off, even if unintentionally, is a hero. Midoriya weakly moved his head forward, trying to headbutt him but only swung his head forward. The henchman laughed as Midoriya kept his upper body lean forward, putting all of his weight on the sword as his legs came off the ground. The arm was now at stomach level. What, you trying to kiss me or something her? 2 more sentences. He usually had only let people get in half of one, but this guy kept nearly getting 2. Midoriya had stopped pulling and shoved off the wall, forcing the sword still frozen downward and forward. The arm was attached still, but it was just along for the ride as Midoriya pierced the man's guts. His weight shift toppled the man, forcing him on his back with Midoriya atop him, sword still inching deeper and deeper. Quote. Who are you calling a hero? The broken painting mask made his words sound strange, especially when he started breathing heavily. Midoriya hadn't intended anyone to hear that, it was more a jab at the quirkless idiot who failed to be a hero then started smacking people with a metal stick. To the henchman, however, who was pinned to the floor by what he now noticed was a strangely dressed man, it was unnerving, especially as he began to put together all the smaller details about this guy. Like an underground hero, all his colors were muted, but his mask seemed to warp his voice as if trying to hide it, something heroes didn't bother with. His eyes didn't seem to see him as a person but tore him apart as if dissecting him. Above all that, there was the fact that heroes didn't run through 2-bit gangsters on really dull painful swords and then stomp on them. This man was not on the side of the law and didn't seem too bothered that he was about to commit a murder. Quote. You're making quirk-enhancing cigarettes I hear. The villain on him stomped on his left arm, the one the sword was stuck to. The impact sent his arm down, and the sword deeper into him. Quote. Wanna talk about it? Midoriya didn't know how to ask about the cigarettes, but the man seemed very cooperative. He just mentioned them and he got tons of details. Still, his sword was stuck, so he set his foot on the man's arm and twisted his sword, innocently unaware that was usually a torture tactic. He hadn't researched many stabbing techniques since katanas weren't built for it, otherwise he would have asked the man to disengage his quirk. The ice broke off with a snap and he checked the sword, unaware his foot was standing on the now unprotected cuts he had inflicted earlier. The henchman was now viewing him as someone around the level of Tatsun Love or Chiller's leader, Sao, and they had recruited Sao from a different country just to get someone as violent as him. Even he wouldn't purposely fuck up an attack to gut somebody though, he wasn't that smart. This guy was thinking ahead, like a serial killer. They might have had more men, but they didn't want to go into serial murderers. Those guys were real psychos. Quote. You in a gang. His words were punctuated by heavy, harsh breathing. The henchman nodded, talking only when asked. Quote. It got a name. Yes, sir. It's Chiller, sir. The man's mask was slightly broken as if some wild animal clawed it. Faintly in the dim light, you could see the makings of a smile. Quote. You got a name, but I don't care. What's this meeting for? Wasting time. It seemed like he knew about the meeting, and like it somehow disrupted his plans. He might have been trying to get the cigarettes from one of the lower rungs, but this meeting had all the sources in one place. His target had gone from a small-time drug dealer to an entire organization that only started 3 days ago just to get some quirk enhancers. What was this madman's quirk? And no, sir, he was being more formal now than his own boss. The sword casually drifted around, running along his arm as he spoke. It's for the heads too. To plan about going out of the district. How are they doing it? This man already knew a lot. He might have been a hitman sent from some bigger gang out of district, meant to stir up the pond so none of the local gangs could get out and get bigger. They want to sell the drugs at more places, and they want to start getting into bigger shit. Bank robberies, kidnapping, the man was chuckling, laughing. He was too scared to go any further so he thought, but a man standing with a sword intent to stab him seemed to surpass his expectations. Hey, you guys, rob banks, you can't even stop one rat. There was a rat in the gang. That made sense of how he knew so much if someone inside had told him all the details. They probably weren't too high up, otherwise, he'd know more already. Quote. A shame about the gangs. You should go to the police station and tell them about this place. Turn yourself in, I don't care. We might even meet again soon. Haha, don't tell your doorman, wouldn't want to spoil the surprise. They might see each other again. Was this guy planning a hit just because he was a witness? Fuck that, this guy had just been playing the whole time. Prison was way safer than any streets that sent someone this good to curb stomp some minor gangs. I won't tell anybody, not a soul. I'll go, right now. This got the man to take his foot off him, then kick him towards the door. He flicked the blood off his blade and kept his gaze fixated on him like a hawk as henchman hit the road. They probably had someone watching the outside of the building, and tell that psycho if he didn't do what he said he would. He told off the doorman and took his bike to the nearest police station to come clean. Quote. Man, is this stupid getup that scary? Midoriya rubbed his ankle. God, it was killing him. That kick off the wall had almost made him scream. He could barely focus through the pain and was breathing heavily. Still, he might see that guy again if he joined another gang. It'd be a good test of skill to see how he improved since his first and, if he didn't get a move on, possibly last gang raid. He grabbed some ice chunks and scampered back up the wall for safety's sake, then thought over what the henchman said and couldn't help but snicker. Quote. Rob banks. PTFFF. They couldn't even beat one kid in their own base or keep track of how many people he knocked out. How were they going to rob a bank? He let the funny image of these group of clowns trying to rob a bank. Still, he breathed back into focus and rolled his ankle. Didn't seem too bad if he didn't keep weight on it. He applied the ice to his ankle as his breathing steadied out. When the ice was all gone, he was going to move back along when 2 people came in from outside, some of the goons. He looked around for something to bury them with, found nothing, and shrugged. The cops should arrive soon, surely he could relax now. The coppers might be coming, hurry up and tell the bosses so we can bail. A voice came from the door, dashing all Midoriya's hopes. He was this close, and still, the world went on. He finished crawling ahead of them, shifting so he could stare down at them easily. They were running and would soon pass him if he didn't do something. Midoriya flipped again as he fell, landing with a sense of deja vu backpack first atop the guy in the lead. Second guy tripped on both of them, falling as well. Midoriya rolled off, thankful that only one of his injuries was flaring up. He could accurately feel 2 of his ribs from all his backlands, despite the best attempts of his backpack and clothes. Definitely, when he got body armor, he'd make sure it was cushioned. Still, all this was internal. Midoriya didn't have the time to waste. He stomped on the first one as he tried to get to the second one, but an arm grabbed his leg. Instead of trying to shake it off, the pseudo-sword drew and flashed in a heartbeat striking the man on his leg. As landing goon flinched and let go, he didn't pause his walking. He got into a one-handed, roof guard, with his sword resting against his shoulder, tricep parallel with his back and elbow pointing to his right at a little under a 45 degree. His left untied his sheath, pulling it free. The second man was getting up, looking down at him as he went for the gun. Made the same mistake as the other goon, couldn't keep his eyes away. Midoriya couldn't move quickly, so he instead stepped forward and forced himself to be calm. He led with the right foot and brought his left arm across his body, watching as the running goon brought the gun towards him. Midoriya's sheath snaked forward and struck his arm before it could get all the way to him and brought his sword into the runner's arm. There was a thunk and a yelp of pain as his sword bounced off his arm, then both sheath and sword whipped forward along his arm into the goon's face. He fell on his ass and twitched, dropping the gun. Midoriya turned and dashed, favoring his left leg and dropping the sheath. Landing goon was on hands and knees and pulling his fun. Instead of a proper sword technique, Midoriya brought his right knee into the goon's face, pushing his body up before stomping down on his unfortunate ankle for attack 2. Now his knee and his ankle hurt. Outside, 3 figures looked at the 3 goons, contemplating the increased security. They knew something was going on, and now was the time to act. Confidently, the 3 figures approached the goons. Chapter end notes. Can you imagine things going right? What a meme. Midoriya goes in for planning, and the plan goes up in smoke as he makes it. That's some real-time strategy right there. I usually try to think of 3 things to post, but I'm a little hard-pressed if I'm being honest. I spent most of today working on one class, so I couldn't be writing. This might be the longest I've spent typing outside of an essay. I started this chapter before I went to class, before lunch, and I'm finishing it after my dinner. If this keeps up, my upload schedule might become normal and weekly like most people. This upload schedule is really weird, but I enjoy this as a time-wasting exercise for myself. Quirk-enhancing drugs, EH. Wonder when quirk-enhancing drugs will come into play in the NHA. Certainly not in the Yakuza gang or the vigilante spin-off I still have never looked at. I wasn't sure about the whole, complete misconception of who he is and his motives, until I imagined someone dressed like him with a sword approaching me in a dim room after I know he knocked out 7 dudes. Hell, forget the costume, someone in a Barney costume would be scary after doing that. But Barney's always scary, so that's a moot point. Those injuries are starting to rack up. I don't like torture porn, just gonna throw that out there, but half the shit we see in MHA would cause tons of pain for a newbie like Canon Midoriya. Also, I'm not sure if gravity is whack in MHA because if not Stain's quirk definitely has something to do with hopping around like a rabbit on crack. That man can move faster than any rule-abiding mammal on 2 legs can, but I'll be ripping him off soon so can't complain too much. Midoriya's new secret technique, falling on his ass from heights. Why not fall leg first? Leg first is usually the best method and to have literally no resistance. If your legs aren't as limp as soaked noodles you might break your legs. From there you want to land on things that aren't bony, like your butter back. The backpack served as cushioning, so it only aggravated his rib injury. For the knockout method, the force generated is about 3,600 pounds for an adult male. We'll bump it down to an even 3,000 pounds since Midoriya is a small guy. For those who remember my end notes about a baseball bat in your noggin, it takes a whopping 900 pounds on average to make someone's brain shake enough to knock them out. A little more than elite boxers, but humanly possible. However, I can no longer find this information so it might be wrong. Still, that force is suspiciously close to the strength it takes to break ribs and in one hit. I think it's safe to say if you got good at this, a one-hit knockout and back problems could be in your future. I said I couldn't think of anything. Apparently, I lied. Midoriya in this version is skilled at 2 things, not by his choice. Running away and hiding. That's why Midoriya is secretly a monkey. Still, when Monkidoriya does it he has a habit of leading to injuries. He'll be learning to move correctly soon. Last in-universe thing, Midoriya nearly gutting a dude. While it was played for laughs, to be fair, it was dark and hard to see and Midoriya had better things to think about than why this random gangster in a den of gangsters trying to kill him was being so helpful. It's also easier to kill with weapons than most people think. Just go watch some Game of Thrones and see how much effort Arya uses when stabbing people with needle. Another thing I mentioned in a comment that I'm not sure how many people read, I'm coming up with shorter names for these attacks to call them by on my own. In universe, this will be Midoriya's parodies of super moves or a special technique he can't do normally, like falling off a rafter ass first onto a dude to knock him out that I can refer to. Why, I'm going to be compiling all of Midoriya's moves and how to do them in a separate section. I'll link it in the notes if I do get around to making it. It will be partially for me so I can remember all of the random things Midoriya knows how to do and what he calls them, and I'll rip off the group text style of series and put Midoriya's thoughts on the moves in there. That's it, gonna go get to work on Midoriya getting arrested and spending the next 10 years in jail. Later skater. Chapter 12. Chapter 12. Chapter summary. 9 currently unconscious, 6 heads of a gang, 3 strangers approaching, 1 person alerting the police. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Midoriya rested from his favorite rafter, no longer considering how weird it was that he'd been in them so long he could pick a favorite. His ankle was feeling better, and he had just finished up his new notes as he waited for the police to arrive. There was a chance that the police would find him, but if people who worked here couldn't do it, Midoriya didn't have much faith in the police doing it either. But it had been 30 minutes and no sign of anyone coming. Did that guy run away? Probably, or went to go get backup. If so, his backup sucks. They hadn't arrived either. He'd gone further in than ever. There were people below him constantly, and no one knew came. He lay on his back, listening and writing away on things he now knew he'd need in the future. Somehow, he'd skipped over medical supplies. Maybe he could snag some if they had any here. Some training in unarmed combat would be great, or maybe if he stuck to equipment a grenade would be lively right about now. While the spot was comfortable, what was bothering him was the 17 people below him. They didn't look up regularly, and even when they did look up they couldn't spot him among the broken ceiling tiles and pipes. From the ground 15 feet below, Jesus himself could be sitting up here for all they knew. The main problem was his ankle. Since swordsmanship started at the feet, his ability to quickly and correctly perform sword techniques was greatly hampered. In a one-on-one fight with these dipshits, it was nothing. But against 17 hell, even against 7, he'd need to be in top shape just to outrun them, let alone fight them. As it were, he had found places where he could slip up 1 level to the 2nd floor. From what he had seen, it was much quieter, with a lot fewer people. He tapped a finger on his handle idly, trying to make a decision. Waiting for other people to do things had always been his way, but it hadn't gotten him anyway besides harassed. Midoriya decided he needed to keep taking matters into his own hands. His legs latched onto his current support beam and his upper body latched onto a neighboring one, creating a sort of slithering effect as he moved across the room. He could listen in easily and keep collecting tips on places for future hits if he decided to keep doing this vigilante thing. It was an odd mix of easier and harder than he thought it would be. Fighting and hiding, what he thought would be the hardest, was a cakewalk. Nobody noticed shit. The hard part was moving anywhere, it was just so physically taxing. Soon, he was off from the main section. They were still hypothetically looking for him, but they stopped putting any effort in after only 5 minutes. Now, he took another grunt who was alone and took some liberal guesses on how much force he'd need to hit the guy with to knock him out. As crude and disgusting as it was, the bathroom was the place to be for knockouts. The entrance was isolated from the rest of the room, so no one noticed what happened there. His prey had done a couple of checks that way before leaving the conversation, and Midoriya waited patiently for him to come out. Midoriya had a good 2-second gap to wait for his latest victim to come out while he was in position to attack without being seen by anyone else. He listened, calming his breathing and slowing it down to hear better. The flush, the footsteps, the creak of the door. Midoriya rolled off the rafter and did his patent-pending back slam. He'd stolen shirts to use as cushioning on himself and put more cloth in his backpack. While it still hurt, it wasn't as painful now. He rolled off the collapsed man and kicked him once to ensure a knockout before dragging him off into the corner. He then robbed him slowly, collecting more guns and ammo. Still, despite all he had done, he didn't have any cigarettes. He was going to the second floor now. This was ridiculous. He added this victim to the pile of 4, all shirtless for some reason, and made his way back up into the ceiling. Midoriya had to put his sword through first, then his backpack, and lastly his body just to fit through the hole. There were bigger holes, but this was the darkest room. Just entering the room took a minute, and that was without stopping to listen and check for anyone coming. The second floor was, vertically at least, smaller than the first floor. The ceiling was still in pieces, but the random garbage was smaller usually. His favorite strategy was gone, and he was back to wall and corner hugging. At least, a normal person would have thought that. 2 people walked into his entrance point, not bothering to talk as they made their rounds. Security up here was tighter, and still calm despite the intruder. No one seemed to take the intruder thing very seriously. Still, they walked within 5 feet of Midoriya, one of them directly staring at him before moving on. Midoriya stood at the entrance, crouched down. He was partially visible from the doorway, but the gray of his coat blended in with the dust and shadows. In light, it would have looked stupid, but in a dark dim room, right next to the entrance so anyone who looked at him would still have their eyes adjusting. He didn't wait for them to come back this way, their eyes would have adjusted by then. He rose the moment he was sure they were in his range, despite one of them getting to see him move. These goons had their hands on their guns but still couldn't do a proper quick draw. Midoriya moved forward and upward, striking the spotting guard in the chin. His head went up and he stumbled into Goon 2, knocking them all off balance. Midoriya advanced and used Attack 2, favoring the crushing power instead of the cutting power by striking with the back of the blade. Both guards stopped stumbling and fell into each other, entangling themselves in a mess of limbs. Another Attack 2 to the first guard. Attack 2 had the most power when hitting around chest height, and beyond that lost power, making it unsuitable to hit people on the floor. However, with a pile of enemies, the stacked bodies put the target into a semi-effective height, while locking them into place. He traded the accuracy he didn't need for power, cracking Spotter Goon over the head. He went out like a light, and Goon 2 was in a worse position as his partner became deadweight, trapping him on the floor while Midoriya lined up his next attack. He prepared to scream but instead got a soccer kick to the side of the head. 2 bodies were dragged and stacked like crates after being searched. Midoriya stopped bothering with taking the clips and just started stacking them in weird places no one would look, like in the rafters. These rafters were 9 feet up, over half the last room's height. There wasn't room to sit on top of the support beams anymore, but he could hang there if he wanted to do a surprise attack. These cigarettes were proving way too hard to get, and no sign of sirens. God knows what the police were doing right now. Midoriya readjusted to a new room with a door that he could stand behind. When 2 goons came through, he'd shut the door and take them out. 5 minutes of stretches and fiddling before he got his wish. 2 huge guys came through, both having to crouch to move on this floor. God knows why you'd station 9 feet tall people in an 8 feet tall building. Seemed inconvenient. Midoriya decided he could wait a little longer for some better prey. 7 minutes later, there was a door slam and a drawing slice that took the legs out of Goon 1. Midoriya did a slight jump for attack 2, taking out Goon 1 in a single swing. He switched to hitting Goon 2 the second his feet made contact with the ground, clocking the henchman upside the noggin with 1, 2, 3 consecutive attack 2s. This guy could really take a beating. As he searched the bodies, there started to be a racket down below. Gunshots and screams. The cops were finally here. No sirens, but probably for stealth or something. How'd he know? Nobody paid attention to the cops these days, but if he kept being a vigilante he'd have to start thinking more about them. Probably learn to tune into police stations, if those still existed. He vaguely remembered them in old cop movies that sometimes played on the television when the hero news ended. Still, he found a mix of jack and shit. 2 more bodies for the body pile. He stacked them with the others, nearly getting caught as people started running past him to go downstairs. The cops were apparently a real threat, unlike one rogue idiot. Still, sometimes partners would separate and give him a target. He delighted in taking out the slow ones, like the one who'd been tying his shoes and gotten 2 knots to the back of the head, or the one who'd pulled out a cigarette. Midoriya had really rushed that guy, but it was just a normal cigarette to piss off Midoriya. While he was moving the body, he heard a shout a lot closer than downstairs. It sounded suspiciously close, and while he didn't know what it was he was not a fan. Especially when he saw someone coming towards him while drawing a gun. Could take the body as cover, but these guys don't care about each other. Even with my bad ankle, it's better to move now and hide later. One last push on the body to send it up slightly, and give him some backward momentum as he bolted for the doorway. There were gunshots, but not a single bullet within a foot of him as he went into the next room and turned the corner sharply to break the line of sight. Then he climbed the wall frantically, scaling the wall messily and getting into the rafters. The man came in with his gun drawn and kept moving forward, only sparing a glance to make sure the intruder wasn't hiding in the corner. He kept going forward, assuming Midoriya to have not stopped. As his footsteps echoed into the distance, Midoriya took a moment to congratulate himself on the fact that he didn't piss himself despite being under gunfire for the first time in his life. He stayed there until his arms ached and he didn't hear anyone moving on this floor anymore. To say he dropped would be an overstatement. He basically fell with a minor bit of coordination. He did roll out of his fall, straight into a wall. He rubbed his face as the mask dug into his cheeks, muttering. This mask hurt like hell when it was hit since it didn't have any padding. He shakily kept moving forward. There were 4 stories, and it just dawned on him that they didn't seem to give a shit about the bottom entrance. There was a much bigger reaction from the top entrance, meaning there was probably something important up there. He wasn't sure he could take another cheat entrance, so he'd have to make one. He stretched again, then ascended to a position where he got to stand while still reaching the ceiling. He put his head to the next floor's flooring, listening. He heard voices, and so moved on. 3 times he moved on until he didn't hear anything or anyone. He tapped the floor to make sure nothing heavy was atop it, then impaled it with his pseudo-sword. The first hole was very small, more of a test. With a hole, he could hear into the room better. Muffled talking, insults, and he could just about make out his favorite reoccurring ice spiker. When this was over, he'd have to give that man a medal. That guy was making this so much easier. Midoriya gouged a larger hole and paused again to wipe away the fragments of tiles while listening. He couldn't be sure, but they didn't even sound like they were talking about the police downstairs or the intruder upstairs. They had very misplaced trust in their security. It looked like he was entering some sort of closet, possibly connected or very close to the meeting room. He headed up when he thought he had enough room, bag first, sword second, and himself last. The space inside the closet was only 3 feet wide. There was shelving. Midoriya climbed up as he went straight to the ceiling, searching for a good spot to start another hole. Fuck if he was going to try taking on 6 gang leaders at once. He checked and listened, noting that the people above seemed to be on a rotation like the ones on the second floor. He waited until the guard passed before poking a small hole, listening and waiting. Took a while to get up there, and his feet were killing him from the weird stance on the shelves, but he finally got to the 4th floor. It was brighter, as there were windows up here. Midoriya enjoyed it, however, because after being gone for 2 floors, his rafters were back. It was a hop skip and a climb back into his most comfortable spot. It was like a safe space where bigger people couldn't get, turning his small stature into an advantage for something. He meditated there for 5 minutes, partially to calm down and partially to check out the guards. They didn't seem too special, but there were still 2 of them. The rooms were bigger, and as Midoriya followed them he started to notice voices. The guards went into a break room, something that could be helpful for him later. Midoriya took note of it as he moved away. Ambushing here would be bad, as the guards on break might hear or see something. A little while later he found the stairs up to the roof and the stairs down. He took a moment to check the guards' timing and dropped down. In one slash he broke off the door handle to the 3rd floor, trapping everyone up here unless they broke the door down. For what it's worth, the doors had to be praised. They looked recent unlike the rest of the place, installed probably to make this place more secure. Unfortunately, the door frame still looked like garbage, and the handle had only taken 3 swings to break. Midoriya went back into the rafters with the doorknob in his back. It'd be a while before anyone noticed something was wrong, but Midoriya wanted to trap them longer. If he could pin them in the break room, he could pick off the guards on patrol. He'd need something to lock them in place, and the cops could hypothetically come at any time. Midoriya took a look outside to see how many cop cars there were and found waiting outside. Nobody. What? He squinted to make sure. No cars outside at all, but maybe that was just from this angle. After all, you didn't want the gang you were trying to take down seeing you come in. It just wasn't right though. By now the 1st floor should have been cleared and the 2nd should just be getting cleared. Pro heroes might be really egotistical, but they had standards for working. Usually. Still, relying on others wouldn't get him anywhere if there really was no one out there. He stepped up onto the windowsill and jumped up and off, grabbing a rafter and pulling himself up. He took in the scene as he slithered along the ceiling, listening and watching. Another set of guards came out of the room, and as they went toward the window he followed like their shadow. They went up to a window, 2 over from the one he'd been at originally, and started smoking purple cigarettes, finally. They started talking, unaware as Midoriya stood over them, positioning himself before descending like snow, his arms grabbing their shoulders and shoving them headfirst into the windowsill. There was a coughing sound as their eyes fogged, with Midoriya wrapping his arms around one and squeezing for 10 seconds. The man had already been choking on his own cigarette. This pushed him over the edge and he went limp. Midoriya lifted the other man's head and made him give the windowsill a second kiss. His eyes rolled up, and he went limp. Midoriya dragged them one by one away, creating a new stash in what was quickly becoming his second favorite spot, closets. There, when both were inside, he robbed them for those cigarette packs. And found nothing. Using his noggin, they might have been holding the cigarettes when they came out of the break room. That meant someone in the break room had them. This feels less like a life or death moment and more like a grindy side quest. Midoriya threw the ammunition into the ceiling, guns in the bag, and bailed. He saw more people come out of the break room and followed them, eager to get those cigarettes if it was the last thing he did. After that, he'd bail for good. If the police weren't coming by then, fuck him. 12 guards. Fucking 12 guards had gotten a mouthful of window, wall, floor, or sword. Not one had even the wrong kind of cigarettes on them. And 9 of them were smoking. If he wasn't so unthreatening, he'd try to get them to talk about where they kept the cigarettes. Still, they should be running out of guards. They were definitely starting to get suspicious that no one had come back and spread out to search. Midoriya followed one to his closet, and when the goon opened the door he dropped down and shoved him inside, watching the man trip over the bodies and kiss the wall. Midoriya followed him and gave him another knock to the head, taking him out like a light before bailing. If anyone had any coordination, they'd find the bodies soon. Returning to his natural vantage, he watched for any other easy prey. Nothing he could really do as they regathered, took notice of the missing member, and went over altogether to find him. Made it much harder to pick them off. Eventually, however, the 7 people below him started to go to the door only to find Midoriya's handiwork. A couple of them shot at the steel door. Those rebounding bullets were the most dangerous things to Midoriya in an hour. Somebody left the group, probably to make a phone call judging by what he was holding, and Midoriya slithered after him. He followed him around the corner, arriving just in time to see him finish dialing and press the phone to his ear. Midoriya drew out the doorknob, giving it a gentle underhand toss further down the room. With a gentle tink it bounced, the man's attention snapping as he went for his gun. Midoriya waited until he got the gun pointed down the hall but before he spoke out. His roll off the rafter had improved since he started, letting him land on the man's shoulders and driving him forward. His head slammed into the concrete floor. Him and concrete saw each other low-tan banging Midoriya's knees. Not his best move today, but he had quite the competition for the worst move. He ascended again after grabbing the gun, holding it in his mouth as he went up. 20 seconds later, somebody came to check up on the missing man. He called out about what he found and broke line of sight to get the doorknob. Midoriya wasn't having that, so instead of going down all the way, he wrapped his legs around the metal beam. He grabbed his sword as he flipped upside down, appearing in front of the man and performing an upside down attack too, clocking him right in the chin and then wrapping his arms around the beam, finagling himself up and away from the scene of the crime. Shit, it got Ray. They were paranoid now. How's it doing that? Ain't it obvious? Some sort of invisibility quirk or something, maybe a warper. Come out when we can't see, hit and run like a bitch. From now on, nobody leaves the group, yeah here. Invisibility quirk, teleporting quirk. Honestly, he was flattered. Now those were some powerful quirks. Still, if they didn't split up he couldn't do anything. But as he contemplated his situation, he noticed something above him moving. They replaced the knocked out guards on the floor entrance. Why wouldn't they replace the guards at the top? These geniuses didn't even think of going up for help. He went to one of the outside walls on the far side of the building from the Goonies and opened a window, scaling the building. He did half a man up, letting his eyes wander over the scene. Turtle Guy had gotten back up and was talking to another guy, some pigeon with a big gun. Neither seemed aware of the chaos below, but Midoriya wasn't sure he liked that gun. Still, eventually, the geniuses downstairs would come to the same conclusion as him. Only took 10 minutes before they thought to tell the roof guys. Bird Guy led the way downstairs, the Turtle Guy hobbling after him unaware of the speeding sword coming for the side of his head until his head ached, and all thought disappeared as he collapsed. Then Midoriya perched atop the stairwell down, out of immediate view of anyone coming up and waited. He positioned his feet, readied his garbage bag by spinning it like a rope, and waited. He was hoping the Bird Guy would come up again, this seemed a pretty easy takedown. Instead, he got another random guy, but he'd do just fine. Midoriya dropped his arms down, wrapping the bag around his throat and pulling backward. It felt like his arms would go out of their sockets as he pulled up, the man's feet leaving the ground as his arms came up, trying to claw off the bag. Midoriya built up a little momentum as he felt his arms losing their grip, swinging the man back and forth before letting go on the backswing. The man went flying down the stairs back first, landing with a crash. Somebody grunted, meaning he'd gotten two. Midoriya didn't stop to admire his handiwork, putting the garbage bag in his teeth and quickly descending back into the windowsill as people screamed and came up. He re-entered and returned to the rafters, only putting the bag away when he thought he was safe, and crawling towards the stairwell to see his handiwork. Two guys still at the bottom. Midoriya approached quietly, lining both of them up before pouncing. He came down on both of them, grabbing their shoulders as he felt to pull them down and force them down. His shoulders screamed as he forced them forward and off balance, but he kept going, drawing his sword and clipping both in one hit. The second hit, attack 2, clocked one out of work for the day. Goonie 2 didn't bother with his gun, trying to jump back. Midoriya stepped up into the stairwell, switching to another drawing cut and hitting his shins. Goon 2 fell forward slightly, and his chin was struck by a second drawing cut. To back it all up, he threw in a third consecutive drawing cut, just to make sure. The man looked to be down, so Midoriya pulled him and tossed him vaguely backward. It had been pretty quiet, but Midoriya hated testing his rotten luck. He grabbed his sword two-handed again, breaking off the doorknob inside before going into the fourth floor again and closing the door from inside. He wondered how long it'd take them to notice, but for now, he had some people to search. He was pretty confident he'd be getting closer at least. There were 3 left from the original room so, statistically, he was running out of failures. Eventually, he'd get it right, but right now he wasn't sure he wanted to let them out of their little temporary prison. Instead, he sauntered over to the break room. A small, cramped, smoke-filled room. He left the door open to air it out as he searched. A bottle of water for him, he pocketed the bottle when he was done. Didn't want to litter, lots of boxes instead of chairs, and a small wooden table. One of the boxes was open, and Midoriya started to get the idea he knew what was in them before he even touched the box with his rubber grabber gloves. Hundreds of brandless purple boxes, with an open pack on the table. Inside, some purple cigarettes. He pocketed 3, one to report, one to keep, and one as a backup. If he kept one, he could compare if he ever found anything like this in the future, and he'd kick himself if he didn't. He turned to leave as one of the doors creaked open. Standing in the entrance to the 3rd floor, a lean-looking dude with gray dead-looking eyes and a purple cigarette in his mouth. He stood over 8 feet tall with white dreadlocks, contrasting his heavily tanned skin. His biker jacket had chillers written into the arms at each shoulder. He walked in, letting the door shut behind himself. He cast a glance around the room, taking the cigarette out of his mouth and breathing out a mix of smoke and frost air. Yo fuckers, where y'all at? Chapter end notes. Running away isn't just a coward's option, it's usually the best one. Hey, how's those police doing? Still don't exist, whack. In a more relevant and less stupid direction, one of the fast facts is that the heroes and the police share a lot of constraints. The paperwork, the necessary communication, the main difference is the legal usage of quirks and how much they get paid. If things worked like they did in the movies, those popos would be there in a heartbeat. Midoriya's Jungle Gym Adventure. Gangs can either be in buildings they own legally or random buildings illegally. Illegal buildings are much more likely to be in disrepair, but since the gangs don't legally own the property, no large repairs can be done. A once bustling office transforms into a snaking mess when most of the lights stop working, gangsters are shooting the walls and ceiling to bits, and people stop bothering to clean. Last things last, Midoriya's fight with Mao, high five if you remembered that was his name, the leader of the Chillers. Will Midoriya overcome his injuries, stress, inferior training, inferior experience, lack of surprise, inferior strength, inferior speed and win? Strap in to watch Midoriya get his ass kicked. Chapter 13. Chapter 13. Chapter summary. Unlucky 13, and the end of Midoriya's bad luck. Did you know there are things worse than bad? Chapter notes. I need to address an elephant in the room real quick. Usually, in the notes at the bottom of a chapter I'll post my thoughts on what happened in the chapter, answer some questions I think people might have, and never look back. This time, there was a pseudo question that I need to answer. Why is Midoriya beating down this gang so easily? Is he really good, or are they really bad? Imagine you want to play a sport with a lot of minor rules you can learn and small tricks. We're gonna use baseball. You study baseball every day, learn every trick in the book, and spend hours a day practicing. You hold yourself against the professional baseball players. You get your hit ratio up, but it's still a lot less than the real players. You practicing throwing and catching, but it's still not as good as the real pitchers. One day, you sign up and play in the little league. Suddenly, everyone goes from the professionals you admired to basically random. Pitches aren't being thrown right, people are running the wrong way, team coordination is non-existent. That's what Midoriya is experiencing. Midoriya had spent his life watching and learning from the best of the best, even if never in person. He knew almost all the rules by heart. His academic grades are worse than his heroic grades if I recall for almost anything. Standard engagement, arresting, searching. He takes all of the skills he watched and learned about from professional heroes who stop major crimes to some small-time gangsters, most of which have never even shot at anyone in their life, let alone hit anyone. Midoriya ripping off ambush tactics from people like Kamui Woods and Eraserhead is overkill on most of these guys. I didn't want to mention this because it takes away from most of the tension when you realize Midoriya is basically coming into what everyone thought was a free-for-all with the rules and tactics memorized. I mention this now because all this only applies to what I've been calling goons. Nowhere near good enough to be villains, not even good enough to be henchmen. At henchmen, this stuff Midoriya has been doing becomes necessary to win. And, God forbid, you fight someone who actually is a real villain. This stuff might not even be enough to get you out alive, let alone safely. Hey look, a real villain. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Mel looked around the room, taking out the cigarette and spitting out some crushed ice he'd been. Munching, on, he breathed out again, shaking his head. Aye, dipsheets, dumbasses, where y'all at? He stomped around, going straight to the break room. Aye, where are y'all at? His eyebrows scrunched together as he looked around, only 3 feet below Midoriya. Midoriya was pressed into the corner above the door, breathing as slowly as he could. The man below him was lean as a whip and carried himself a little too much like an explosive teen Midoriya was acquainted with. He didn't bother to take his hands out of his jacket except to adjust his cigarette, having just kicked the door off its hinges in one hit. It had folded like tinfoil at the impact, leaving an impression of his boot at what he thought had been steel. Sheet, now I'm curious. He took the cigarette out of his mouth, tapping off the ashes. How the hell did all those sons of bitches disappear? He looked at his cigarette, then his eyes snapped to one side. Maybe a little fly on that wall can tell me. Halfway through his own sentence, he threw his cigarette at where Midoriya had been. It hit the wall and crushed itself on impact. The biker chuckled, creating an eerie effect as smoke drifted from between his smiling teeth. A little cat and mouse, bitch, and I was thinking this sheet be boring. He grabbed the open cigarette pack, lighting another one, and taking a deep breath. I'd ask y'all boring sheet. Like, fuck, can't even think of any, it's so boring. Oh yeah, where y'all from, what y'all want? Well, I'm supposed to anyway. Da boss can suck dick if I'm letting this sheet get away after that boring piece of ass downstairs. Every so often during his conversation, his head would swivel as he searched. Y'all be talking out toxic lover boy with this sheet. Shoulda taken him myself if they this week. He leapt from the ground, not using a wall like Midoriya had to, and grabbed one of the rafters. He could hold on with one hand and use that one hand to pull himself up while looking at the crouching Midoriya. Thank ya bucko, but this is cat and mouse, not hide and seek. He swung on the rafters like monkey bars, skipping straight over the whole crawling thing for a more direct approach. When he guessed he was far enough away, he stopped moving his arms and swung his legs up, nearly kicking Midoriya in the head as he slithered away. Midoriya had switched from his slow and careful movement to a much faster version, inspired to learn or die trying. Instead of wrapping his legs around the support beam, he stepped on them like he was crawling on his hands and knees. He had to adjust his grip several times, swaying his whole body to avoid getting kicked by the gangster who was enjoying his discomfort. God, y'all sure can run, but can y'all fight? Midoriya picked a spot and dropped, watching the man also drop to try and fight on even footing, instead landing on one of the knocked out goons and falling over as the grunt groaned, still unconscious. Midoriya couldn't outrun this man. He was much bigger and moved much more quickly. His best bet was to rush and pray for miracles, hoping God took pity on him for dealing with Bakugo for all these years. He ran up, also stepping on the goon, and soccer kicked at the man's head. Because a mix of elbow and bicep protected the man's head. He smirked, knocking Midoriya's leg and flipping up before kicking back. Unlike Midoriya's kick, this one was meant for martial arts. His knee came up to his chest as his foot whipped through the air, clearly a lot more painful than some sports kick in a fighting world. Taking it seemed painful, so Midoriya opted to dodge by falling straight under it. Midoriya's legs went slack as he fell under it, landing on the goon. He was basically a trampoline at this point, and rolling backward. Biker man stepped up, taking a moment to punt the henchman to one side. He went a good 10 feet without touching the ground, before colliding with a smack. And continuing in a sideways roll. Ya don't hit too hard, so ya must be one of those coward types. The man spat to one side, still walking forward. I might hate talkative lovers, but at least they got guts. If there's one thing I hate more than toxic lobsters, it's little bitches always running. Like bitches, bitch. He opted to run forward, aiming for another kick at his midsection. He had a lot of faith in his kicks, so his quirk probably had something to do with it. Midoriya jumped back into the side the kick was coming from, making any last-minute readjustment near impossible. Ice leg quirk, cold kick quirk. What a ramblin' bout. He stepped in with another kick before switching legs like a tap dancer, catching Midoriya mid-dodge. Ya trying to guess my quirk? Midoriya might have responded if he didn't get sent flying. Because he was trying to dodge into the attack, the leg switch had made him dodge out of it. Dodging out of an attack is when you are already going in the same direction that an attack is. Midoriya could tell he'd accidentally done it because his arm wasn't shattered and he only flew 7 feet before he started rolling. That's pretty quirkiest ya know, the man said as he stood straight, one arm flat against his side and the other on his hip to show off his legs, which on a second glance seemed to be a bit longer than usual. His pants were also weird, not jeans or leather but some strange loose silk thing. Ya think I got an ice quirk cause I run dot chillers? What if that name's a reference to putting people on ice? It isn't, and it is a reference to ice quirks since my whole crew has but still. It's da principle, damn it. He ran up towards the end of his tirade, trying heel smash Midoriya's skull in. Midoriya dodged into it again, trying to tackle his leg but lacking the weight or muscle to make it happen. Sorry, about that, got bigger things, on my mind. Midoriya was cut off by the leg suddenly flying at him, kneeing him in the shoulder and sending him back. Nah, we cool. Zhu don't keep assuming cheat like that. Sides, my quirk don't got cheat to do with ice. Midoriya hit his head on the ground, his vision flashing red and leaving him groaning. Tell ya what, I'll even tell ya my quirk. I got hype, more excited I am about cheat, da badder I get. Why, are you telling me that? Midoriya hadn't even drawn his sword yet, he was content trying to get both his feet under him with no arm support. The other guy laughed, spreading his arms. Makes it more exciting, and that makes me tougher. Not a bad plan for dumb man. He laughed, then stepped back in and performed a spinning back kick. His entire body pivoted off what had been his lead leg, his left leg piercing forward like a spear at Midoriya. Midoriya didn't try to dodge, grabbing his backpack and forcing it in his path. His quirk explained his superhuman strength. The more excited he was, the faster and tougher he seemed to get. Maybe even stronger. His leg hit the backpack, sliding along the hard guns inside and pushing Midoriya instead of properly striking him. The backpack still hit him and pushed him down, but he was still alive and in one piece. Biker overstretched, and as he readjusted Midoriya got both feet under himself and backed away. The biker man didn't give him enough room to get a good plan going, he was too fast. He needed distance, and he needed it quickly before his brain became another stain on these. Really filthy walls. The biker went for another spinning back kick, giggling with excitement. It was coming from Midoriya's right side, as perfect a counter as he was going to get. Midoriya went for a draw cut at the ankle, something he could testify to was a great inconvenience if damaged in a fight. These pseudo-super moves made contact, Biker's muscle clearly outdoing Midoriya's, but that was fine. It was Biker who flinched slightly at the injury, his own power damaging his leg. Midoriya's sword was thrown back after a moment's pause, but a moment could be enough if he could just get enough of them. So that's how ya took toxic losers down. He shook his leg, smiling. I almost felt that. Not bad at all. Midoriya got a sinking feeling as he looked at Biker's shoes. Steel-toed boots, probably with ankle protection, blocking that last attack when he had the element of surprise. Shit. Biker came forward again, his leg parallel with the floor and swinging forward. Midoriya moved into the attack to avoid it right as he stopped and turned it into a sideways heel kick, bringing his leg backward and into Midoriya's right arm. It wasn't a clean hit, but if only one person was hitting, who cared how clean it was. Midoriya had crouched so he'd stop going flying, managing to downsize flying like a kickball, to stumbling like a drunk person. Real big improvements, but Biker would have no rest, driving him further down. He stepped in to try and knee Midoriya again as Midoriya brought his sword pommel downward, the two colliding. The sound of the contact gave away that it probably did hurt, but Midoriya was pretty sure he lost the exchange despite not even being pushed back in any way by this attack. The pseudosword went flying out of his grip and over his shoulder. Biker stepped back to shake his leg, the same leg as his ankle at least. Wow, look at that bitch fly. Biker put a hand over his eyes as if watching something far away. Actually, the sword just hit the ground, so it was pretty far away. Ya gonna go get that? He refocused as Midoriya charged, performing a much slower, weaker spinning back kick. Instead of hitting dead on, it hit the side of his leg with enough force to mildly sting. Even the soccer kick hit more than that. Quote. Well, least ya got guts. But I believe ya trying to do. Midoriya attempted to move back, but Biker stepped into the kick, raising his back leg. His entire body spun on the lead leg's heel, turning his body into an almost straight line for the kick. It hit Midoriya straight in the gut, forcing his lungs to breathe out and not allowing him to breathe back in. Dat. Midoriya went a full 16 feet before rolling twice and hitting the wall. He'd passed his sword on the way here, but his whole body was shaking. Biker slowly approached, removing the cigarette again to breathe out. Man, fuck whatever gang sent ya here. Model gangster, don't talk much, learn quickly, and follow orders even when they get ya 6 feet deep. Ya know what feet I'm talking about, right? Measurement here's diff, I'm no good at it. Midoriya struggled up, using the windowsill to get up, before pushing off and returning to the rafters. He grabbed one and began to pull himself up, keeping his eyes on the Biker. Maybe I was a little too quick to call ya a quick learner. He stepped forward and jumped up, right as Midoriya placed both feet against the window. When Biker was in the air, Midoriya kicked off and straight into him, tackling him backward. If he was lucky, this would snap the guy's neck and the fight would be over, albeit gruesomely. Realistically, this would give him 2 maybe 3 seconds to get his sword. With his luck, this monster would take half a second to shake it off and punt Midoriya out the window where his mom would never know what happened to her son. Option D happened because something Midoriya didn't plan for was truly the unluckiest option of them all. As the man fell backward, his hands went behind his head and his back bent. He hit the ground all right and immediately went into a backflip. There was a popping sound in his ribs on impact, but instead of being able to get his sword, Midoriya was hanging off a completely fine Biker, smiling ecstatically at him. Like my roll small fry. Midoriya did a slight pull up and kicked off him, the Biker laughing. He gestured for Midoriya to continue with his hands as Midoriya picked back up his sword and returned to roof guard, slowly sidestepping. That was pretty fun. Ya wanna lead again? The Biker leaned forward, gesturing for Midoriya to approach. Midoriya stood still, trying to get his breathing back under control, making Biker tisk. Guess I'll be leading this dance. He ran forward, getting into range and launching a spinning back kick. He favored the leg with no injuries for his kicking, but it sprung forward in a predictable arc. Midoriya dropped the sword and swung slightly upwards, grounding himself as the two forces impacted. For Midoriya, there was no attack this time, just a feeble defense that hit the shin. Because he'd been expecting it, the Biker didn't put as much force into it for his own leg sake and to keep Midoriya close. He then switched to what had been his supporting leg through the kicks, lashing out with the same kick knowing that Midoriya couldn't get a defense up to block it. Instead, Midoriya opted to press as close as possible during the kick to stop it before any momentum could get started. What was supposed to be a kick turned into a knee strike that left Midoriya winded and made his counter swing weak and slow. Biker danced around the weak two-handed attack, then caught unaware as Midoriya let go with one hand, extending the sword's range another few precious centimeters. The tip cut his shirt and made a line across his pecs. The Biker looked surprised, but still not worried. He stepped out as Midoriya put his weight on the sword, leaving Midoriya floundering forward into his first punch as something occurred to Midoriya. He never actually saw the guy use his arms for anything other than to carry his own weight like it wasn't even there, but that'd mean his arms were stronger than his. Midoriya blearily opened his eyes. There was red in them, not from something psychological but the blood dripping down from his forehead. Biker man was shaking his hand, whistling. God, ya still up after that perfect uppercut. Ya flew 20 feet, that's like a record for me. He laughed as he walked forward. Let's see how many records I can beat today, huh kid? Chapter end notes. In order to get someone to move 20 feet straight up, with gravity stopping and pulling them down but no calculated air resistance, it takes about 4,000 pounds of force, about the same as cracking ribs. Imagine how much it must take to send further than that. Chapter 14. The main man, Mao. Chapter summary. Beatdown. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Midoriya hit the wall upside down, bouncing off his head and onto the floor while the Biker stood back, rolling his shoulder. I gotta say, ya really are an amazing punching bag. Even